Chapter 500. If Jiang Yan had not arrived in time, Yuhuan Tianzuan and his group would have successfully entered the space jump and reached the Supreme Palace enclosure as quickly as possible. Although Qinshi could chase after Yuhuan Tianzuan to the Supreme Palace enclosure after dealing with the Tuoba family's men of sacrifice. But by that time, Tiandu's group might have already broken up into pieces and scattered in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Could Qinshi plow through the Supreme Palace enclosure and find everyone in Tiandu even if he had to dig 3 feet into the ground? Even if Qinshi really had the leisure to do so, he did not have so much time to waste in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Therefore, it was obviously the best result to be able to catch the remnants of Tiandu before they scattered. Qinshi was very satisfied with this result. The matter of thanking Jiang Yan was naturally within reason. This was a catastrophe that affected the whole world and appeared almost everywhere at the same time. Although the disaster did not last long, it still brought huge losses to mankind, and the American continent suffered the most. This disaster was unanimously named by scientists all over the world, Skyfire. It was said to be a supernatural phenomenon caused by a solar storm. As for the specific cause of Skyfire, scientists were still researching and had not yet given a rigorous and reasonable report. Skyfire swept across the world, but Wuxia was the least affected. Only the city of Zyges and a few surrounding villages and towns were attacked by Skyfire. As Europe was too close to Asia, they were the first to receive support from Daoist Island. Africa was poor and Australia was small. These places were sparsely populated and were not the first target of the Tuoba family. Therefore, the American continent, which was far away at the other end of the Pacific Ocean, naturally became the disaster area. Old Me had been through a lot in the past few years. First, there was the threat of the supervolcano, and then there was the trouble of Changhua and Yiji. After a while of peace, Skyfire came again. Perhaps this was retribution. Old Me did not do bad things in Central Asia because of oil, which directly caused the local people to suffer the pain of war. After the Skyfire incident, Old Me could finally have some peace and quiet. Nowadays, the TV stations broadcast the disaster situations all day long. But for the viewers watching the TV, as long as the disaster did not befall them, wouldn't they still be eating and sleeping every day? Disaster relief? That was a matter for the country. At most, the commoners would chat with each other after a meal. Jiang Yan accepted Qinshi's thanks with a smile. In addition, he also brought a slightly surprising piece of news to Qinshi. That was, Daoist Island had officially joined the Wu Lian. Because of this, Jiang Yan became one of the Wu Lian tycoons. His status was even higher than Qin Yongwang and Wang Chuanjiu. All in all, Jiang Yan was much more sensible than Yuhuan Tianzuan. Ever since Jiang Yan had known Qinshi, this old guy had been sending gifts and running errands for him. The only thing he hadn't done was to enshrine Qinshi in the ancestral hall. As the saying goes, the older the wiser. Combining the information collected by the 9 serenities and the bits and pieces of information he heard from Qinshi, Jiang Yan immediately connected the dots and guessed most of it. Seeing that Qinshi had even taken care of Tiandu, if he still dared to jump around under Qinshi's nose, wouldn't he be tired of living? Therefore, Jiang Yan immediately changed the management strategy of the 9 serenities. Since he couldn't beat you, he might as well join you. After all, the 9 serenities was different from Tiandu. Jiang Yan didn't have as much self-esteem as Yuhuan Tianzuan. Who didn't want to work with? Since there were benefits to following Qinshi, why would he waste time blindly thinking about it? In this regard, Qinshi didn't express any opinions. After all, he didn't own Wu Lian and Jiang Yan wasn't his subordinate. Why should he worry so much? If he had the time, he might as well spend it playing with Nian. The days returned to normal. In the blink of an eye. The little girl was now 7 years old and had officially entered the 2nd grade of primary school. It had to be said that Nian was a child that didn't cause anyone to worry about her. As soon as Qianxi sent Niannian to the classroom, the teacher came to find him alone. Niannian's class teacher was surnamed Zhang. She was a woman in her 30s or 40s and looked very kind. "Mr. Chen, it's like this. Chen Nian's academic results and her performance in all aspects are extremely outstanding in the entire grade. As her class teacher, I feel like I have an obligation to remind you. I wonder, have you ever considered letting Chen Nian skip a grade?" Hearing this, Qianxi couldn't help but be stunned. Skip a grade? In fact, skipping a grade was actually a very common thing in primary school because the Department of Education also had clear regulations in this regard. According to the Department of Education's regulations, as long as the student's academic performance was particularly outstanding and reached the first grade in advance, the student or their parents could apply. After a comprehensive assessment by the school and a written report to the Higher Education Department for approval, the student could skip a grade. After all, everyone's IQ was different. There were always children whose IQ was far higher than their peers. She already knew calculus. Did she have to be locked in the classroom with her peers to calculate addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division? Qianxi had officially begun to teach Niannian cultivation. Although he only taught Niannian how to gather qi and didn't teach her any techniques after that. However, under the constant scouring of the spirit energy of heaven and earth, Niannian's intelligence would inevitably increase by leaps and bounds. At this rate, it wouldn't be long before Niannian wouldn't be able to play with the two brothers anymore, and this was also the fundamental reason why Qianxi had always been opposed to letting Niannian cultivate. It felt like he was giving Niannian a catalyst. It inevitably gave him a strange feeling. There was a saying, "Hope for your son to become a dragon and hope for your daughter to become a phoenix." Was Qianxi really different from those flirtatious B***Gs? Did he really have to turn his daughter into a fool? How was that possible? At this point, Qianxi could only let nature take its course. Now that the homeroom teacher took the initiative to mention this point, it actually meant that Niannian really wasn't suitable to continue staying in the second grade. The matter of skipping grades was something that had to be done. However, before this, Qianxi still had to ask the little girl for her opinion. After all, there were two sides to everything. Grades during the compulsory education period were secondary. Physical and mental health were the most important. Children in the lower grades were not mentally mature. Suddenly changing from a familiar environment to an unfamiliar environment, and surrounded by children who were older than her, naturally took a long time to adapt. Once the child couldn't adapt, the impact could be extremely bad or even irreversible. Therefore, after Qianxi and teacher Zhang had a detailed discussion, he called the little girl to the office. "Niannian, tell Daddy, do you want to skip a grade?" Chapter 501. Skip a grade? The little girl blinked her eyes, as if she did not understand what Qianxi meant. Seeing this, Qianxi patiently explained to her, "The teacher said that with your grades, you don't need to go to the second grade. You can go directly to the third grade and study with the third grade brothers and sisters. Niannian, do you want to go?" Hearing this, the little girl smiled proudly. "Sure. The students in our class are too stupid. They can't even do such simple questions. I'm much smarter than them. I already know how to do the third grade questions." The little girl's grades were very good. It was inevitable that the teacher would take the initiative to give her special attention, so she had already done the third grade questions before. And this was also the reason why the teacher took the initiative to ask Qianxi to let Niannian skip a grade. To Qianxi, grades were naturally secondary. A child's physical and mental health was the most important. Therefore, even if the little girl showed an eager look, Qianxi was still a little worried and reminded her, "Niannian, you have to think carefully, you're now a student of the second grade class. If you skip a grade, you'll be a student of the second grade class. Look, the second grade class is there." As he said this, Qianxi led the little girl to the window, then carried her and indicated to her to look at the classroom opposite. That was the second grade class. She did not know any of the classmates in the class. If she chose to skip a grade, then from today onwards, she would be a student of this class. For a child, it would be easier for them to understand if there was a real example. Therefore, when the little girl saw the unfamiliar faces in the classroom of the third grade class 2, she immediately hesitated. She would be studying in that classroom in the future? The little girl stared at the classroom opposite. The expression on her little face was very serious. She did not immediately express her opinion. However, Xianxia saw the hesitation in her, so he immediately turned around and smiled at Teacher Zhang. Was there a need to say this? Nian must be scared. Instead of forcing her into an unfamiliar environment, it was better to let her stay in the second grade class. At least it wouldn't bring too much psychological pressure to her. Xianxia's mind turned, and he suddenly made a decision. Zhang Laoshe didn't have any objections to this. After all, she had seen too many situations like this. Basically, every year, a few children would face such a choice. There were pros and cons to skipping grades, so she was only responsible for making suggestions. The final decision was still in the hands of the parents. Thank you for your concern, Teacher Zhang. As you can see, this child doesn't seem to be very willing, so the matter of skipping grades, Xianxia turned around and thanked Teacher Zhang. But at this moment, the little fellow suddenly interrupted him. Dad, what are the benefits of skipping grades? After saying that, the little guy looked up at Xianxia, his eyes filled with curiosity. Benefits? There are many of them. Look, you have to study for a full 6 years in primary school. If you skip grades, you will study 1 year less than others. You will enter secondary school and even university earlier, taking 10,000 steps back. If your results aren't good in the future, you can even repeat a year more than others. No matter how you look at it, it's still a win. Of course, with your results, repeating a year is definitely impossible. Dad believes in you. Xianxia briefly explained the benefits of skipping grades to the little fellow and didn't forget to encourage her at the end. Hearing this, the little fellow put on a thoughtful expression. She already understood the benefits of skipping grades. As for the disadvantages of skipping grades, in fact, Xianxia didn't need to point it out. The little fellow could clearly feel it herself. Xianxia never forced the little fellow. So when he saw Nian's hesitation, he immediately made a decision in his heart. However, Xianxia didn't notice. The little fellow had already learned how to read people's expressions. So even if he didn't express any attitude, the little fellow could keenly sense that her father still hoped that she would choose to skip grades. After all, for any parent, if their child could skip grades, it would be a great thing. Because this showed how outstanding their child was. Xianxia felt sorry for the little fellow, just like how the little fellow felt sorry for him. Nian didn't want to disappoint Xianxia. Therefore, after thinking about it seriously, she said to Xianxia with a determined face, "Dad, I want to skip grades." This time, it was Xianxia's turn to be surprised. He thought that Nian didn't understand the pros and cons, so he immediately asked, "Nian, do you really want to skip grades? Aren't you afraid? After skipping grades, you won't be in this class anymore. The students in class 2 of grade 3 are all 1 year older than you. Who knows, they might even gang up to bully you." As soon as this was said, a trace of embarrassment flashed across Teacher Zhang's face. If she didn't want to skip grades, then so be it. Who would scare a child like this? Furthermore, was their school the kind of third-rate school that would tolerate bullying? Teacher Zhang wanted to say something but stopped. Nian immediately replied, "I'm not afraid. Although I'm younger than them, I'm smarter than them. Why should I be afraid? I'm also the class monitor of our class. I want to be the class monitor of grade 3 class 2 in the future. Also, no one in our class dares to bully me. I'll beat up whoever dares to bully me." At this point, Nian clenched her little fist and added proudly, "This is what you taught me, Dad. Did you forget, Dad?" Hearing this, Xianxia instantly felt awkward. After glancing at Teacher Zhang with some embarrassment, he hurriedly stopped the little fellow's bold words. Don't talk nonsense. Dad didn't teach you to hit people, Dad, you clearly said that before. When did I? When? The teacher is right next to us. Don't talk nonsense. I did. I did. Dad is shameless. The father and daughter joked around for a while. When Teacher Zhang saw this, he didn't take it to heart. Instead, he went back to his seat and smiled as he handed a form to Chen Shi. Mr. Chen, this is the child's grade skipping application form. Please fill it in accordingly. After filling it out, I'll submit it to the school for review. After the school's review is completed and the information is submitted to the Education Bureau, the child's school roll can be changed in about 7 working days. Of course, this is all part of the process. School starts today. If you don't have any other opinions, Nian can directly report to grade 3 class 2 with me. That's it? Chen Shi took the form from the teacher with some hesitation. After all, he didn't know that the little fellow already had her own ideas. He only thought that the little fellow didn't understand the pros and cons of this and thought that it was a fun thing to do. Regarding this, the little fellow was exceptionally resolute. She wasn't afraid. Furthermore, she would perform better than before. She definitely wouldn't disappoint her father. Thinking about it, if Chen Shi knew the little fellow's true thoughts, he would definitely be moved to tears by this considerate little jacket. Sorry, I've been sorting out the plot for the past 2 days, so the update is a little slow. Please forgive me. Chapter 502. The little girl's 3rd grade life began abruptly. According to the school's arrangements, today was the day that the new teaching materials were distributed. Hence, after the little girl returned to 2nd grade class 2 and picked up her backpack, she left the classroom that was supposed to belong to her under the watchful eyes of her classmates. At that moment, Chen Shi saw a proud expression on the little girl's face. It had to be said that this child really made her father proud. Under the guidance of the teacher, Nian quickly arrived at the entrance of 3rd grade class 2. The form teacher of 3rd grade class 2 was also a middle-aged woman with the surname Li. She was slightly chubby and looked exceptionally amiable. It should be known that the form teachers of elementary schools were usually not changed easily. From the day the child entered school, the form teacher would always be by their side for the next 6 years until the child graduated. Hence, the moment Teacher Li saw Nian, her face was so happy that flowers were about to bloom. Since this child could skip grades, it meant that she had huge potential. In Wuxia, the child's results were naturally the teacher's achievements. Wasn't this equivalent to her picking up a huge bargain? Teacher Li was so happy that she wanted to help Nian carry her backpack. But she didn't expect that. Her suggestion was politely rejected by the little girl. Thank you, teacher. I'm a student. I should carry my own backpack. Seeing the little girl's obedient manner, Teacher Li was instantly delighted. This child is so sensible. You're called Chen Nian, right? I like you. It was class time now, so after a simple exchange of words with Teacher Zhang, Teacher Li directly put her hand on the little girl's shoulder and walked her into 3rd grade class 2. The 3rd-year students were basically all old foxes. After Teacher Li went out and was delayed for a while, the classroom suddenly became a little noisy. Come, everyone, quiet down. Let me introduce you, this is our new classmate, Chen Nian. Everyone, welcome. After saying that, Teacher Li took the lead in clapping her hands. In an instant, there was a burst of lively applause in the classroom. The little fellow stood nervously beside Teacher Li, looking at the unfamiliar faces below the stage. She suddenly felt a burst of fear in her heart for no reason, so much so that her little face slightly tensed up. Chen Nian skipped a grade, so he should be 1 year younger than you, but her grades are very good, so she doesn't need to go to the 2nd grade anymore. Now that she's in our class, she'll be the youngest student in our class. As Chen Nian's elder brother and sister, you should, speaking up to this point, Teacher Li deliberately paused for a moment, then raised his hand to signal the students present to answer together. Seeing this, the students in the class were also quick-witted. Even if they hadn't rehearsed it beforehand, they all replied in unison, "Take care of her." Yes. Chen Nian is our younger sister, so we have to take care of her. The little guy was a little confused. The students in the class were too enthusiastic. After hearing such warm applause and cheers, the tension on the little guy's face slowly dissipated, and he gradually revealed a shy smile. She stood silently in the corridor, smiling as he watched his daughter reintegrate into a new big family. This scene was somewhat familiar. That smart and sensible little baby had finally grown into a shy flower bud. Girls matured earlier, and Ninian was on the tall side. Even in the 3rd grade, she was considered average height, so the teacher could only arrange for her to sit in the 3rd row from the back. One had to know that the little brat now was incredible. Not to mention the 3rd grade, even kindergarten had the phenomenon of puppy love. Regarding this, many parents' reactions were, "The child is still young and doesn't know anything. It's just two people together for fun." On this point, their understanding was too one-sided. Actually, children also knew what it meant to be in a relationship. It was just that their thinking was still very simple, and they couldn't understand the meaning of the word sex. What was wrong with children? Couldn't children like other people? Thinking about the opposite sex day and night, yearning for the opposite sex day and night, this wasn't something only adults could do. Children could also like people. It was just that some children were too shy. Even if they liked someone very much, they would never show the slightest bit of it. They would even show an inexplicable hostility to the person they liked. In the words of an adult, it should be, 300 taels of silver here. In Chen Shi's eyes, Nian was simply a little kid who hadn't been weaned yet. But in the eyes of her peers, Nian, on the other hand, was a true goddess. There were many precocious children in this class, at least half of them. Therefore, when Nian finished her self-introduction and walked from the podium to her seat, almost everyone was staring at her. Some of the bolder ones stared straight at her, not even blinking their eyes. Some of the more timid ones deliberately turned their heads to the side and secretly looked out of the corner of their eyes. Almost every child had their own thoughts about this student who had suddenly skipped a grade. However, most of the boys' hearts were filled with admiration, while most of the girls' hearts were filled with jealousy. Chen Shi naturally saw the subtle changes on everyone's faces. However, he was like many parents and didn't take these things to heart. They were just children. They were the flowers of the motherland. They were the pillars of the motherland's future. How could they have so many dirty thoughts? Seeing the little guy sitting down, Chen Shi's mood immediately relaxed. He gave Big Cat a look, and the cat immediately understood Chen Shi's meaning. So, like a wisp of smoke, it leapt up to the big tree in the middle of the school building, and then laid down on a tree branch facing 3rd year class 2 to take a nap. Then, Chen Shi nodded at the teacher through the window to thank him, and then quietly left. The little guy seemed to have noticed that her father had left, so she quickly looked out of the window, but there was no one there. Seeing this, a trace of disappointment flashed across her face. But soon, this disappointment disappeared with the new teaching materials handed out by the teacher. By the time she took out a fountain pen and solemnly wrote her name on the first page of each book, her 3rd year studies had officially begun: thieves in 1st grade, thieves in 2nd grade. No one chased after the 3rd grade beauties. Love letters from the 4th grade flew everywhere. Piles of homework from the 5th grade. Pairs of lovebirds from the 6th grade. This is our class song. Once, it was too loud and alarmed the teaching director. Then, the whole class was scolded by him. Well, at that time, I was in 3rd grade, the last few lines are more serious, so I won't write them here. Chapter 503. After settling the little girl down, Chen Shi left the school. As soon as he walked out of the school gate, he looked up and saw Qin Ruoying in a white dress, waiting quietly by the side of the road. In fact, Xianxia had already said that there was no need for two people to pick up and drop off the child, but Qin Ruoying did not pay attention to him at all, and completely treated sending Niannian to school as something that she had to do every day. Yingying, okay, where do you want to go today? I'll go with you. Before he arrived, Qianxi's voice came from afar. Qin Ruoying thought for a while, but shook her head gently, and then responded very indifferently, I won't go shopping today, let's go home first, I have a few questions about cultivation that I want to ask you. Ask? Hearing this, Qianxia was suddenly happy, so he quickly went over and said politely, what's the relationship between the two of us, do you still need to use the word ask? Qin Ruoying rolled her eyes at him, and did not say anything. Seeing this, Qianxia did not feel offended at all, instead, he happily reached out his hand to hail a taxi. After this period of time together, Qin Ruoying's attitude towards him had improved a lot. On one hand, it was because of the family's enthusiasm towards her. On the other hand, it was entirely because she gradually found many traces of her existence in her daily life. For example, the familiar feeling of walking in the alley, the flowers in the yard, and the photos in the phone, all of these things seemed to be saying, she was the mistress of this family. Therefore, Qin Ruoying's attitude towards Qianxia gradually improved. Although she had not recalled any memories of the past, at least she had regained the feeling of cultivation under the reminder of her sister-in-law. In addition, it seemed that only when she was cultivating, she could faintly find the intimate feeling that she had with Qianxia. The many changes in Qin Ruoying were naturally seen by Qianxia. Therefore, every time he thought of this problem, he could not help but feel a burst of joy in his heart. If it continued to develop at this rate, wouldn't it not be long before he could climb into Yingying's bed again? They didn't wander around today, so when the couple returned to the Sai courtyard, it was only 9 in the morning. As soon as Qianxia pushed open the door, the sound of punches and kicks could be heard from the courtyard. It was his sister-in-law and her 2 punching bags. After this period of actual combat, Chenghua and Yi Zhi's martial arts had greatly improved. When the two of them joined forces, they could even easily survive 200 to 300 rounds against Qin Xueqing. Qianxia didn't want to disturb them. After nodding slightly to his sister-in-law, he followed Qin Ruoying to the west wing. However, although Qianxia didn't intend to interrupt them, Chenghua directly jumped out of the battle circle the moment he appeared, then quickly came in front of him and said hurriedly, Mr. Chen, thank you for taking care of me during this period of time. I thank you in advance. Hearing this, Qianxia had to temporarily stop his footsteps. He glanced at Qin Ruoying's back, then glanced at Chenghua's anxious face. In the end, he could only let out a long sigh, then asked impatiently, what's the matter? It was no wonder that Qianxia's attitude was so bad. After all, he could only step into the west wing every day at this time. Being delayed by Chenghua like this directly affected the time he had to chat with Yingying and cultivate their relationship. Chenghua was shocked by Qianxia's bad attitude. But after being stunned for a moment, he seemed to have mustered up some courage. He quickly lowered his head and cupped his fist to Qianxia and said loudly, I have been away from home for a long time. Next month is my mother's birthday. On such an important day, I hope you will allow me to go home and visit my mother. I understand. I am a sinner. Whether I live or die depends on your whims. My request may seem rude, but please allow me to return home for 3 days to fulfill my filial piety, sir. If you are worried, I can make a vow here that I will come back as soon as possible. If I disobey, Xianyuan Chenghua is willing to be struck by lightning and not enter the cycle of reincarnation after death. Perhaps he was afraid that Qianxia wouldn't agree, so Chenghua spilled the beans like a bamboo tube, spilling everything he wanted to say. After speaking, this kid was like a child who had done something wrong. He tilted his head and peeked at Qianxia eagerly. It is your mother's 100th birthday, so you want to go home to fulfill your filial piety? Hearing this, Qianxia did not immediately respond. Instead, he looked at his sister-in-law thoughtfully. Although he had caught this kid with his own hands, he had already handed them over to his sister-in-law to deal with. Looking at this posture, this kid seemed to have calculated that he was easier to talk to than Qin Shueqing. So he did not even ask for Qin Shueqing's opinion and directly came to ask for his approval. Chen Shi did not speak, but Cheng Hua was a little anxious. So, he immediately knelt on the ground, bowed and shouted, "I hope you will allow me to go home on account of my filial piety. If not, I would rather commit suicide on the spot than live an ignoble life in this world." Cheng Hua's words were powerful and resonating. After hearing this, Chen Shi laughed. "Oh, are you threatening me?" After hearing Chen Shi's words, Cheng Hua's heart suddenly jumped. He suddenly remembered Chen Shi's character. Oh no! Mr. Chen was always amenable to coaxing but not coercion. He had to change his method of asking him. Thinking of this, Cheng Hua immediately changed his strategy. Instead, he looked at Chen Shi with grief and indignation. At the same time, he looked at Chen Shi with a pitiful expression. Seeing that this kid had stopped talking and was looking at him so pitifully, Chen Shi was too lazy to tease him anymore. So, he directly asked Qin Shueqing, "Since the two of them are under your care, how do you think we should deal with this matter?" Hearing this, before Qin Shueqing could speak, a trace of despair flashed across Cheng Hua's face. They had known each other for so long. Chen Shi would invite the two of them to sit down and eat together when he had nothing to do. But what about Qin Shueqing? Every day, she would beat them up violently. She had never been kind to them. Therefore, the moment he heard Chen Shi ask for Qin Shueqing's opinion, Cheng Hua's heart had already lost all hope. But what Cheng Hua did not expect was, Qin Shueqing's answer was 10,000 times better than he had imagined. Everyone has parents. Since he is so filial, this request is not too much, but the two of you remember, this trip can't be delayed for too long. I heard that it takes 4 days to go back and forth from Earth to the Supreme Palace enclosure. In that case, I'll give the two of you 7 days off. If I don't see the two of you back after 7 days, I think the two of you should know very well what the consequences will be." After speaking, Qin Shueqing walked to the east wing without looking back. Only the two of them were left standing there in a daze. She agreed just like that? Cheng Hua was in a daze. Yi Ji blinked and could not help but wonder if he had heard wrongly. It was not his mother's birthday. He did not expect that he could actually go home with Cheng Hua to visit his family. Qin Shueqing actually agreed? Seeing the two of them looking as if they had seen a ghost, Chen Shi could not help but smile. Then, he turned around and walked into the west wing. If Cheng Hua and Yi Ji were to be seen as students, then Qin Shueqing was obviously their class teacher whom they feared like a tiger. Mischievous bad children were never liked by teachers. The two of them knew their place. Therefore, if they were to ask their class teacher to sign a leave of absence, they would rather forge a leave of absence than step into their class teacher's office. This was the general prejudice that bad children had against their class teacher. In fact, why would a class teacher discriminate against every child in her class? Therefore, even though her sister-in-law beat the two of them up every day, actually, she was very warm in her heart. Chapter 504. After getting Chen Shi and Qin Shueqing's approval, Cheng Hua and Yi Ji could finally leave this planet that made them feel sad at this moment. Although Chen Shi did not leave any restrictions on them, the two of them were tactful, so they did not even think of using this opportunity to escape from Qin Shueqing's evil clutches. The two of them seemed to have already accepted their fate. Even Cheng Hua, who had always had a fiery temper, did not have any intention of encouraging Yi Ji to escape after regaining control of the cloud-piercing shuttle at this moment. Instead, he looked back at the azure planet with some reluctance. As expected of a great figure in the supreme realm. Such breadth of mind and boldness, you are really a role model for our generation. Yi Ji did not notice the strange look on Cheng Hua's face. Perhaps to relieve the depressing atmosphere on the ship, Yi Ji stood at the stern of the ship and sighed with emotion. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he could not help but tease with a smile, "Changhua, let's hide in the heavenly market enclosure, shall we?" Changhua did not reply. Seeing this, Yi was like a demon tempting people to fall into depravity. He moved closer to Changhua and continued to bewitch him. "How about the purple myrtle enclosure? The 3 enclosures are like 3 wooden rafts floating in the vast void. Although their whereabouts are uncertain and difficult to find, they converge once every 100 years. I heard my father mention it before we set off. The next time the 3 enclosures converge should be within the next 10 years. You see, when the time comes, we only need to hide in the heavenly market enclosure or the purple myrtle enclosure." So what if Mr. Chen is a supreme realm cultivator? Could it be that he can turn the 3 enclosures upside down and be determined to find us? Yi kept bewitching Changhua. If it was the old Changhua, he might have been persuaded by him and jumped up to hide in the heavenly market enclosure. But unfortunately, after experiencing Qin Shueqing's constant hardships, Changhua's temperament had been restrained a lot. Therefore, after hearing Yi's incessant chatter, Changhua immediately slapped him in annoyance, and then scolded him with a smile on his face. "Do you really take me for a fool? If you want to go, then go. What's the use of telling me this? I'm the one who swore to Mr. Chen, not you. What are you afraid of?" After hearing Changhua say this, Yi immediately felt relieved. The reason why he tried to bewitch Changhua was because he was afraid that Changhua would act without thinking like before. As the saying goes, a fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. Yi was very pleased with Changhua's change, so he sat next to him with a smile, and then chatted with him casually. "Changhua, I don't know what you're thinking, but I think it's actually pretty good for us to stay here, although we're controlled by others and are punched and kicked by that evil woman every day like a slave. But if we think about it from another perspective, the 2 of us seem to have learned a lot from it. What's more, Mr. Chen is still in the supreme stage. Even if it's just a simple sentence or 2, it will be of great benefit to our future cultivation. So, at this point, Yi deliberately paused, and then said with a determined face, "After 7 days, I will definitely be back here." After hearing Yi's words, Changhua seemed to be a little dispirited and didn't seem to be interested in paying attention to him at all. Yi felt that Changhua's behavior was a little strange today, so he couldn't help but push him, and then asked with a puzzled face, "What's wrong with you? Aren't you happy to be home?" Hearing this, Changhua shook his head, and then muttered in a very strange tone, "Don't mess around, I'm thinking about a very serious problem." "What problem?" "I'm thinking about whether Nian will like the taste of the dragon saliva fruit. You see, it's rare for the 2 of us to go home. We should take this opportunity to bring some gifts back for Nian, right? But I thought about it, and I didn't think of what to bring her." "Think about it yourself. What does Nian usually treat us to? Chocolate, biscuits, jelly, French fries, yogurt, these are all delicacies in the world. As a return gift, we can't take out something too shabby, right?" After hearing Changhua say this, Yi couldn't help but be stunned. "Oh right. I actually forgot such an important thing. Come, let's quickly think about what gifts we should bring for Nian." Time flew like an arrow, and the sun and moon flew like a shuttle. In the blink of an eye, a month's time passed. During this time, the adults were busy cultivating in seclusion all day long, and because the little girl skipped a grade, she needed to spend more time reviewing her homework every day. Everyone was busy with their own things, and the courtyard was much quieter because of this. As time passed, although Qin Shueqing didn't have any clear expression, the expression on her face was so gloomy that it seemed like water was about to drip out. They clearly agreed on 7 days, and a month had already passed, but Changhua and Yi still hadn't returned to Earth. Were these 2 brats playing with her like a monkey? As soon as she thought of this problem, Qin Shueqing's towering chest couldn't help but begin to rise and fall rapidly. After enduring for a full month, she couldn't bear it anymore. Therefore, Qin Shueqing found Chen Shi and wanted to borrow a Xianxia from him. "Do you still have a Xianxia? Lend it to me." Hearing this, Qianxi raised his eyebrows and asked, "What do you want to do?" "Find someone. I want to see, can they hide to the ends of the earth?" Seeing Qin Shueqing gnashing her teeth in anger, Qianxi suddenly laughed. "I think they might be delayed by something. Don't worry, it's only been a month, wait a little longer, there's no rush. How about this, if they don't come back by next month, I'll find time to go to Supreme Palace enclosure again, and I'll definitely catch the two of them for you, okay?" After hearing Qianxi's promise, Qin Shueqing finally withdrew the idea of going to Supreme Palace enclosure. Then, like an inflated blowfish, she angrily returned to the East Wing room. It couldn't be helped, his sister-in-law's temper was just that bad. If Qianxi really gave her a Xianxia, she would probably immediately go to Supreme Palace enclosure to find Changhua and Yi Ji to reason with them. His sister-in-law was furious, but Qianxi didn't seem to care too much. This was because he believed that Changhua and Yi Ji would never dare to trick him. After all, the name Mr. Chen. Now, even if it was at Supreme Palace enclosure, it could be considered a golden signboard. Calm. Wonderful book house. Calm. Chapter 505. Qianxi was certain that Changhua and Yi Ji would come back, so he didn't take this matter to heart for the time being. Next, let's talk about the little girl first. After a month of adaptation, the little girl had successfully integrated into the new class. Although she was a year younger than her classmates, they didn't dare to look down on her. On one hand, it was because Niannian's usual performance was very good, so the teachers liked her very much. On the other hand, it was entirely because of her results in this monthly exam. In Wuxia's education system, academic results were the only standard to measure a child's quality. Although the little girl skipped a grade, her results in this monthly exam still easily took first place in her grade. Therefore, when the teacher announced the results, the whole class was shocked. Wasn't this the other family's child that parents often talked about? The teacher also said before that after the monthly exam, the class monitor would be selected based on everyone's performance. And in this so-called comprehensive performance, wasn't the exam results the most important indicator? The teachers didn't like children who were unreasonable. Those children who were obedient and sensible, but their grades weren't good enough to convince the masses. Niannian's performance and results were very good, plus she was the class monitor in the first grade class, so what reason did the teacher have to not let her be the class monitor? Outstanding children would always be singled out as an example. Therefore, this little girl who had just skipped a grade and entered the third grade, after a monthly exam, her name had already spread throughout the entire grade. On this day, as usual, after the little girl waved goodbye to Qianxi, she quickly walked to the classroom and prepared to organize everyone to start the morning reading as the class monitor. This was the first task she received after becoming the class monitor, so she was especially attentive to it. As soon as she sat down, she couldn't wait to take out the language textbook from her bag and neatly placed it on the table. It wasn't time for class yet, so only half of the students were there, but the classroom was especially lively. Niannian looked back and saw that the most mischievous children in the class were chasing each other with brooms. Therefore, she immediately shouted to stop them, "Quiet. Class is about to begin." It was the class monitor's responsibility to maintain discipline. Now that she had become the class monitor, she naturally had to take on this responsibility. Following her outburst, the classroom suddenly became much quieter. Seeing this, the children who were chasing each other stopped and quickly returned to their seats. They were not afraid of Niannian, but they were afraid that Niannian would tell on them to the teacher. Nowadays, a class leader who doesn't snitch, is that still the class leader? If Niannian's prestige in Year 1 Class 2 was earned through her fists, then her prestige in Year 3 Class 2 was earned through her own outstanding performance. It was the third year. No matter how late a child matured, he should be more sensible by now. Teacher Zhang stepped into the classroom just as the bell rang. Looking at the silent classroom, Teacher Zhang couldn't help but nod his head in satisfaction. Then, he gestured for Ninian to come to the podium and lead everyone to start the morning reading. The text for today's morning reading was Zhaozhou Bridge. It was a simplified version with pinyin annotations. The whole text was less than 500 words. After Ninian led the students to read the text twice, the teacher nodded his head in satisfaction and officially began the day's lesson. There were a total of 46 students in their class. It wasn't a large number, so the desks and chairs were all a single set and not a two-person set. After Ninian returned to her seat, she took out the textbooks and put them in her drawer as usual. At this moment, she suddenly realized, he didn't know when this strange thing appeared in his drawer. Ninian took out the thing and saw that it was a letter folded into the shape of a heart. The style of the letter was very exquisite, and it even had a faint fragrance. It was obvious that this was the most popular letter paper in the school's canteen. There was a name written on the heart-shaped letter. It was Chen Nian. Ninian frowned and opened it. The first thing she saw was a few lines of crooked, worm-like love messages. To Chen Nian, I like you. My love for you is very deep as a bottomless pit. I don't look good, but I'm a good person. I'll give you a gift right away. Can you tell me your QQ? And where is your home? My body won't go with you, but my heart will go anywhere with you. Moi, heart, 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 heart. Of course, this was the translated version. There were many wrong words in the original text. The child who wrote this didn't seem to know how to write love. After writing it wrong several times, he directly drew a lot of hearts on it. This was a love letter? Ninian expressionlessly read the contents of the letter. Then, as if nothing had happened, she directly tore the letter that carried the strong love of others into pieces. No one, including the teacher, noticed anything strange about her. She was silent like this, as if she suddenly had something on her mind. In fact, Ninian already knew what a love letter was and what it meant. But she never thought that one day, she would also be the one to receive a love letter. Then there was a problem. When faced with such a situation, what should she do? Should she tell the teacher, or should she tell her father? It was probably because the writer had forgotten to sign the letter, so she didn't even know who wrote this strange love letter. What should she do? What should she do? The little girl had something on her mind, so she was obviously a little muddle-headed for the rest of the day. Finally, the crisp and melodious school bell rang. After the teacher assigned the homework for the day, the little girl uncharacteristically rushed out of the classroom with her bag. She ran as fast as she could. Soon, she ran to the school gate. Then, through the school gate, she saw her father standing in the crowd and waving at her. Unlike the teacher, She almost instantly noticed the strangeness on the little girl's face. So, he immediately walked out of the crowd and squatted on the ground, smiling and motioning her to come out. "Dad!" As if she had suffered a great grievance, the little girl ran out of the school gate and threw herself into Chen-Shi's arms. Seeing this, Chen-Shi's eyebrows suddenly twisted. "Nian, what's wrong? Were you bullied at school? Don't be afraid, tell Dad what happened, Dad will help you. When I was writing, I suddenly thought of a song. Let me recommend, Love Letter, by Jackie Chungo. Unfortunately, love is not a few drops of tears or a few love letters. This may be a little cruel. People who wait for others to give them happiness often don't live happily. Chapter 506. Looking at his daughter's depressed look, Chen-Shi's heart suddenly clenched. After he walked out of the crowd with the little girl, he immediately squatted on the ground, then hugged her and asked patiently, "Nian, what's wrong? Did someone bully you?" Although the little girl's face had a somewhat aggrieved expression, it did not look like she was bullied. Moreover, with her current physical condition, if she was really angry and went berserk, there would be no problem for her to beat up children of the same age. Therefore, the first thought that came to Chen-Shi's mind was actually, Nian was ostracized by her classmates? After all, she was a child who skipped a grade. It was normal for her to not be able to integrate into the new group in a short period of time. Chen Shi had already mentally prepared himself for this, so he immediately began to think about how he could enlighten the little girl. A person's life was a process of constant adaptation. If she wanted to shrink back because she could not adapt to skipping a grade, how could Nian smoothly adapt to other environments in the future? He had to persuade her properly. But on second thought, Chen Shi had an idea in his mind. But at this moment, the little girl suddenly said timidly, "Daddy, someone wrote me a letter." "Ah? A letter? What letter?" Suddenly hearing Nian's words, Chen Shi's train of thought was suddenly disrupted. A letter? What did she mean? He did not react at all. The father and daughter stood by the street, staring at each other blankly. In an instant, Chen Shi only felt a flash of lightning in his mind, and almost instantly, he vaguely understood the meaning of the little girl's words. So, he immediately squeezed out a smile, then pretended to be relaxed and asked, "Nian, who wrote you a letter? Can you show it to Daddy?" As soon as his voice fell, Chen Shi pretended to look at the little girl with a face full of anticipation. However, what he did not expect was, the little girl who had always been obedient to him, this time after hearing his words, shook her head at him for the first time. "It's over." Seeing the little fellow's performance, Chen Shi's heart sank. She thought about how the cabbage she had painstakingly planted had been eaten by the pig next door before it was time for it to bloom and bear fruit. At that moment, Chen Shi even had the urge to kill. It must be those bad kids who bullied Nian for her ignorance. Otherwise, how could a child like her understand such things? Lousy school. I will tear it down tomorrow. As a kind and open-minded father, Chen Shi firmly believed that his daughter could still be saved. Therefore, he immediately tossed those inexplicable guesses to the back of his mind and exhaled deeply. Then, he put on an extremely solemn expression. No matter what, he had to make the little guy realize the seriousness of this problem today. However, just as Chen Shi was about to reprimand her, the little girl seemed to have suddenly thought of something and replied calmly, "I tore up the letter." Torn? Chen Shi was stunned. Then, he took the little girl into his arms and laughed excitedly, "My youngest daughter is sensible. Well done. Well done. MD. He had long heard that children nowadays were very mature. But he also did not expect to think that children nowadays would mature to such an extent. Nian was only a little over 7 years old. Although she had skipped a grade and her classmates were generally 1 or 2 years older than her, they were still only 8 or 9 years old children. Don't you want to watch cartoons anymore? Not playing Mobile Legends? Actually had the leisure to come and flirt with his daughter? Fortunately, Nian did not let him down. If it were not for the many parents at the school gate, Chen Shi was afraid that he would be so excited that he would shout to the sky, "Well done." Chen Shi was very satisfied with the little fellow's way of dealing with it. But on second thought, he could not help but feel a little worried. After all, the problem of puppy love was more serious than being unable to adapt to skipping a grade. Looking at the cute little girl in front of him, Chen Shi could not help but feel a little lost. How should he put it? In Chen Shi's eyes, Nian was simply a child who did not even show any gender characteristics. Children were children. Children were not differentiated by gender. But now? Someone had actually started to write a love letter to Nian. Although Nian tore the letter, this could only treat the symptoms and not the root cause. In fact, Chen Shi was very clear in his heart, as the child continued to grow up, Nian's charm would only increase. Just like Ying in the past, the grown-up Nian only needed to stand there and it should be enough to attract the attention of all the opposite sex nearby. Now that the first love letter had appeared, there would definitely be a second one, a third one, and even countless of them. Then there was a problem. As a parent, what should he do? Even when he was besieged by the four immortals, Xianxia was not so nervous. He frowned tightly and kept telling himself not to think too much, but he still could not help but think of the worst. Some things, the more he thought about it, the more terrifying it was. Xianxia frowned and didn't say anything. The little girl waited for a long time. After seeing that her father was still frowning, she tilted her head slightly and pondered. She was a very smart child and naturally knew what her father was worried about. Therefore, after hesitating for a moment, Nian took the initiative to hug Xianxia's neck and said softly, "Dad, don't worry, I won't fall in love at a young age." Xianxia subconsciously swallowed her saliva. He was still hesitating on how to bring it up, but he did not expect the little girl to take the initiative to mention this issue. A child who was just over 7 years old actually discussed the topic of puppy love with her parents. Such a scene, just thinking about it, would feel a little awkward and strange. "Nian, do you know what puppy love means?" "I know, there used to be a lot of people in our class who fell in love at a young age, but I didn't tell the teacher." "Really?" Xianxia was shocked. Obviously, the class that the little girl mentioned was the first year, second class. A first-year child learned how to fall in love? What was going on with this world? It had to be said that Xianxia's worldview was greatly impacted. But on second thought, he was a little relieved. The situation should not be as serious as he thought. After all, the information on the internet was too advanced now. The amount of information that children could obtain was far more than children in the 80s and 90s. Naturally, they would know more than children in the 80s and 90s. Falling in love was a popular word at the moment. Children were very curious, so naturally, they would learn this slightly novel way of getting along with each other from various channels. Coupled with the special nature of the school environment, it was not surprising that there were many young couples in a class under the vicious influence of spreading rumors. Chapter 507. Nian, if, at this point, Xianxia could not help but pause. After hesitating for a moment, he nervously probed, "If you have someone you like in the future, you know what it means to like, right? It means that you really want to play with someone every day, and that person also likes to play with you. Will you fall in love early like other students?" For parents, this question was indeed a bit awkward. Children were not sensible. Their understanding of early love was naturally very different from the understanding of early love of adults. In fact, for children under the 4th grade to fall in love early, at most, it was a hazy good feeling. And, this kind of good feeling was very easy to change. The child today liked A, tomorrow it might be B, and the day after tomorrow it might suddenly like C, who got first place in class. If A, B, and C were seen as toys, it was naturally easy to understand this problem. Children were both curious and liked to explore at the same time. Therefore, when encountering this kind of thing, it was best for parents not to be too agitated to the extent of going overboard. Correct guidance was the best way to solve the problem. As the saying goes, it is better to let go than to block. Xianxia tried to use a hypothetical method to let the little girl understand the disadvantages of early love. But what he did not expect was, as soon as he said his hypothesis, the little girl directly shook her head and then replied with a firm expression, "No. I won't like anyone, and I won't fall in love with anyone." Hearing this, Xianxia could not help but ask, "Are you so sure?" "Why?" "Because they are too stupid. I don't like to play with them." Looking at the little girl's expression of disdain, Xianxia suddenly understood. So, she thought that her classmates were too stupid, so no one could enter her eyes at all? Although Wenwen and Mingming are also very stupid, but they have always been my best friends, so I don't dislike them. Also, I know what it means to like. If puppy love means two people are together all day long, then if I play with Wenwen and Mingming every day, isn't that also early love? We're not dating. We're good friends. So, Dad, your example is wrong. After hearing his daughter's reasonable rebuttal, Chen-shi couldn't help but be speechless. But on second thought, it was as if he had heard something happy. After laughing and shaking his head, he stretched out his neck and kissed the little fellow's face heavily. Mua. The little fellow was preoccupied with expressing her views on puppy love. Suddenly, she was ambushed by Chen-shi and immediately forgot what she was going to say next. "Daddy, you're so annoying." After saying that, the little thing buried its head in Chen-shi's shoulder, seemingly a little shy. "Silly child, are you shy now?" After today's conversation, Chen-shi finally realized, Nian was really starting to grow up. Time is always relative. Now, let's rewind time to 1 month ago. After a period of hurrying, Changhua and Yiji successfully arrived at the Supreme Palace enclosure on the third day after they set off. Chen-shi didn't have the habit of showing off in front of children, so the two of them didn't know that Chen-shi had caused a ruckus in the Jade Clear Grotto heaven. They also didn't know that the Tuoba family had suffered heavy losses because of it. As the instigators of all this, the two brats only had the chance to visit home after leaving home for almost a year. Thus, just as the cloud-piercing shuttle flew into the sky above Ning province, Yiji couldn't contain his excitement anymore. He jumped off the cloud-piercing shuttle and flew as fast as he could to the Dongfang family. He had already discussed with Changhua beforehand. Everyone would go back to their own families and find their mothers. 3 days later, they would meet here and head back to Earth together. The three great families of Ning province were the Xianyuan family, the Dongfang family, and the Tuoba family. In terms of status, the two of them actually had very high positions in their families. But it was also because of this that the pressure they faced far exceeded that of their peers. Changhua could be used as an example. His father was Genryo, one of the 8 great elders of the Xianyuan family. Since he was one of the 8 great elders of the Xianyuan family, Genryo's cultivation naturally wouldn't be weak. In reality, Genryo, who was in the early stage of soul formation, was already more than 800 years old. Immortal cultivators had long lifespans, but when it came to bearing children, they were far inferior to mortals. As the saying goes, the unseen world has its own will. Under the influence of the laws of heaven and earth, the higher one's cultivation, the lower their chances of bearing children. Genryo had 9 sons and 4 daughters in his life. Changhua was Genryo's youngest child, and at the same time, his last child. Chenghua's talent wasn't bad. In addition, Genryo had a child at an old age, so it was inevitable that he would especially spoil this youngest child. Logically speaking, Changhua should have lived a very comfortable life since he was born in one of the 3 great families of Ning province and his father was one of the 8 great elders of the Xianyuan family. After all, he was a rich second generation. But it was a pity, reality was always slightly different from what outsiders imagined. In reality, Chenghua's life wasn't good at all. Chenghua's mother was called Zhang, and she came from a small family in Ning province. Because of her outstanding appearance, Genryo made an exception and took her in as a concubine. What needed to be understood here was how long a cultivator's life was. If one didn't have someone to accompany them on the long road, wouldn't their life be very lonely? Because of this, cultivators usually viewed status as extremely important. Even though Xianyuan Yuanliang had countless women, other than his first wife, First Madam, the only one who had a proper status with him was the second Madam, Madam Zhang. From this, it could be seen that Zhang was definitely not someone to be trifled with. However, although Zhang's methods were powerful, she was still a woman, so there were many things that Zhang couldn't decide. For example, Chenghua's eldest brother always used the excuse of training as an excuse to often throw Changhua into an extremely dangerous place, and left him to fend for himself there. And this was the fundamental reason why Changhua dared to recklessly enter the Tianshu ruins later on. As a mother, Zhang saw everything, but she couldn't think of any way to help her son. Who asked Changhua to only have one big brother left? Both of them were flesh and blood. In addition, his eldest brother always had a reasonable explanation, so Genryo wouldn't help his youngest son at all. Instead, he would think that his eldest son did the right thing. No matter how noble their birth was, cultivators would face all kinds of unexpected difficulties and crises in their lives. If they could make it through, it would be an opportunity. If they couldn't make it through, it would be fate. Everyone was already used to this. Changhua should have had many brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, most of his brothers and sisters had fallen. Now, only the powerful fifth brother and eighth sister, who had already married into the Dongfang family, were left. Genryo didn't want to be sad, so from the day Changhua was born, his fifth brother became the eldest brother, and his eighth sister became the second sister. Under normal circumstances, siblings should help each other and complement each other. Chenghua's family was an exception. If one had to use a word to describe the relationship between the two brothers, then this word must be, like strangers. Chapter 508. Chenghua's eldest brother was Genyuan Jingqi, who was over 300 years old this year. Ever since he broke through to Yuanying, Genyuan Jingqi had been given a position in the family as a steward. He was considered to have officially stepped into the core management of the Xian Yuan family. It was important to note that any child with the blood of one of the three major families in their veins, regardless of whether they were from the main family or the side family, had to work hard to gain the family's approval. For anyone in the family, status had to be fought for. Since Genyuan Jingqi was able to step into Yuanying at the age of 300, at this rate, as long as nothing too big happened in the future, he would definitely have the opportunity to successfully inherit Genryo's legacy and become one of the 8 elders. What were the 8 elders? They were second only to one person and above everyone else. Seeing that his eldest son was so promising, Genryo naturally hoped that his youngest son could be as outstanding as his eldest son. Thus, after Changhua was born, Genryo handed over the task of educating him to Genyuan Jingqi. And this was the beginning of Chenghua's tragedy. Genyuan Jingqi didn't seem to like this little brother of his. After all, they weren't born from the same mother. When Changhua was still an infant, Genyuan Jingqi used the excuse of cleansing his meridians to soak Changhua in all sorts of strange potions. He even called it a medicinal bath. Zhang had secretly investigated this so-called medicinal bath. Based on the dregs of the medicine left behind, she could roughly confirm that the medicine inside was poisonous. Because of this, Zhang didn't hesitate to have a big argument with Genyuan Jingqi. She always felt that Chenghua's half-brother had ulterior motives. He might want to murder Changhua, so she didn't want Genyuan Jingqi to get close to Changhua. Zhang originally wanted to use this opportunity to completely drive Genyuan Jingqi away from Changhua. Who would have thought that when Genryo heard about this, he would only ask Genyuan Jingqi to show her the ancient book that recorded the formula of the medicinal bath, and then mercilessly scolded her. This ancient book was painstakingly obtained by Jingqi from the Jade Clear Cave Heaven. I have already checked it beforehand. The herbs used in the book seem to be poisonous, but in fact, the principle of using poison to fight poison is used. Therefore, the effect of the medicine is better than ordinary herbs. Jingqi is my child, and so is Changhua. Since they are brothers, why would Jingqi hurt Changhua for no reason? I think you are measuring the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. Don't blame me for not reminding you. Chenghua's talent is slightly better than Jingqi's. If he ends up with nothing in the future, don't blame me for not caring about the relationship between husband and wife. Genryo was one of the 8 elders in the family, and also the head of the family. His words naturally carried a lot of weight. After this, Zhang lost the right to raise Changhua. Mother and son could only see each other on certain days. For the rest of the time, Changhua could only bitterly endure all kinds of inhumane torture in Genyuan Jingqi. Of course, Xianyuan Jingqi would never torture Changhua himself. He would only be like a god who was high up in the sky. He would give his younger brother all kinds of death-seeking missions, and he would call it training. Fortunately, no matter how difficult these experiences were, Chonghua still managed to pull through in the end. As for the love and hate entanglement between Chonghua and his older brother, I won't go into too much detail here. Let's get back to the main story first. Today was Zhang's birthday, which was also her 100th birthday. 100 years old. No matter how long a cultivator lived, how many 100 years could they live in their lifetime? What's more, for someone like Zhang who wasn't very talented, there was basically no hope of yuanying in this lifetime. If it had been someone else, they would have definitely thrown a big party when their birthday was coming to an end. Genrio originally planned to do this as well. After all, he was one of the 8 elders of the Xian Yuan family. Whenever there was a happy occasion in the family, even the head of the family would personally come to congratulate him. But it was a pity. Ever since Zhang found out that Chonghua had entered the Tianshu ruins, she shut herself in her room and refused to see anyone. Genrio originally wanted to take advantage of her birthday to comfort her, but he didn't expect that Zhang would mercilessly block him outside the room. Now that Hua Er's life is uncertain, as his mother, I really don't have the leisure to do that. Please don't blame me. Genrio didn't force his way in, nor did he use his divine sense to probe the situation in the room. This was because he heard a trace of despair in Zhang's voice. That's right. Now that Chonghua's life was uncertain, how could Zhang still smile? Ever since the day she wreaked havoc in the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, everyone had a new understanding of the Tianshu ruins. Although the truth wasn't as mysterious as the legends, at least everyone knew that there was at least one supreme being living in there. What's more, this supreme being could even fight the 4 perfected masters of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven alone. Then, with his methods, could it be that he couldn't block the heart flame lamp senses? Therefore, even if Chonghua's heart flame lamp hadn't been extinguished, Genrio found it very hard to believe that Chonghua was still alive in this world. Sigh. After a deep sigh, Genrio could only silently turn around and leave. In order to not let anyone disturb Zhang, Genrio didn't forget to remind the servants not to let anyone take half a step into the courtyard after leaving. Now, he could only hope that Zhang could walk out of this shadow as soon as possible. After all, Genrio had lived for several hundred years and was already used to seeing life and death. Therefore, when he learned that Chonghua might never come back, he didn't appear too sad or emotional. It was impossible to say that he wasn't sad. But, what was the use of being sad? As an immortal cultivator, Genrio had experienced too many life and death separations in his life. That old heart of his had long been numb. But it was precisely because his heart had long been numb that Genrio didn't know at all, this woman who had locked herself in her room all day because of the loss of her son, in such a state of despair, what terrible things would she do, in a dim room? Zhang sat quietly by the bed alone, holding an old ragdoll in her hand. This ragdoll was personally sewn for Chonghua. It was also Chonghua's favorite toy when he was young. Perhaps she was thinking of him when she saw it. Zhang gently stroked the ragdoll with her fingers as she softly muttered, "Hua, don't worry. Mother has already reached an agreement with the Holy Church. Very soon, they will let Big Brother accompany you to the Tianshu ruins." Her voice was very soft, but the expression on her face was very strange. Sometimes she chuckled, sometimes she was sad. As if she was possessed, it gave people a horrifying and strange feeling. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor. Chapter 509. The first madam had passed away many years ago, so apart from Genrio, Zhang had the highest status in the family. However, so what if she had a high status? Genrio still thought that Zhang's cultivation was too low, and that she was not talented enough to guide Chonghua properly. That was why he had left Chonghua in the care of his eldest brother since he was young. But what happened in the end? Now that Chonghua's fate was unknown, Zhang naturally took it to heart. She felt that Cheng Hua was forced to his death by his eldest brother and father. Her son was forced to his death, so as Cheng Hua's mother, how could she continue to remain calm? One had to know that when a woman went crazy, she would not recognize her own family. To Zhang, although the Xianyuan family was huge, there was nothing in it that she was reluctant to part with. Cheng Hua's trip to the Tianshu ruins could only end in death. As a result, Madame Zhang's heart was filled with hatred. She hated everyone, including Genrio. Just as she had said before, if something really happened to Cheng Hua, she would make sure that the entire Xianyuan family was buried with him. The Holy Church had already responded, so Zhang believed that her plan would come to fruition soon. Zhang silently planned. At this moment, a figure completely ignored Genrio's ban and forced his way into her courtyard. Genrio had set up a restriction on the entrance of the courtyard, allowing only people to leave and not enter. Thus, this person could only use all his strength to break through the restriction and try to force his way in. Soon, this commotion alerted the guards in the courtyard. Seeing that the guards were rushing over, the intruder turned around and shouted at them excitedly. "Open the restriction. I want to see my mother." As soon as he appeared, the guards were stunned. He saw that this person was wearing a white short-sleeved shirt on his upper body and a pair of ripped jeans on his lower body. Coupled with his short hair, he looked somewhat out of place with the surrounding environment. His attire was a little strange. After careful observation, the guards finally dared to confirm that the person in front of them was the long-missing second young master. Second young master really came back. What are you waiting for? Hurry up. Seeing that everyone was hesitating, Cheng Hua no longer bothered with them. He looked around and found that the secret key to open the restriction was on one of the guards' waist. He walked over to the person and snatched the key. The guard instinctively wanted to stop him, but he was instantly intimidated by his fierce glare. How could this person not be the second young master? Seeing Cheng Hua swagger into the courtyard, the guard in charge of keeping the secret key seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He couldn't help but shiver, and then with a face full of excitement, he shouted, "Quick, report to the master. Second young master is back." Cheng Hua's return was like a stone heavily smashed into the water. As the restriction was opened, Zhang finally heard the commotion outside. She frowned and opened the door. Just as she was about to scold him, she unexpectedly saw the figure that made her worried the moment she raised her head. "Mother! I'm back!" When Cheng Hua saw that Zhang had come out, he immediately knelt on the ground and bowed. At that moment, Zhang felt as if she was struck by lightning. She had an expression of disbelief on her face as she stood there in a daze for a full 3 seconds. Then, she subconsciously cried out in shock, Mother, it's me. I'm back. It's really you. Come here quickly, let mother take a good look at you." The scene of mother and son reuniting after such a long time was really touching. Zhang quickly walked forward and helped Cheng Hua up. Then, the mother and son hugged each other tightly. They were so emotional that they couldn't speak. After a long while, Zhang finally suppressed the excitement in her heart. Then, with a concerned expression, she asked, "Fortunately, the immortal emperor protected me. I didn't have to send off my son just now." After experiencing so many things on earth, Cheng Hua had matured a lot. He had learned many things from Chen Shi, including kinship. How could Zhang not treat him as well as how Chen Shi treated Ninian? How great and selfless was this kind of love? Every time he thought of this, Cheng Hua couldn't wait to rush back to the Supreme Palace enclosure. He only hoped that he could use his filial piety to comfort his mother's silent concern for him all these years. As the saying goes, a tree wants to be still, but the wind won't stop. A child wants to be raised, but his parents won't wait. Now, he was finally back. "I'm unfilial and made mother worry." It's fine, it's fine. It's good that you're back," Zhang looked at Changhua up and down. After making sure that he was not hurt, she asked happily, "Hua, didn't you go to the Tianshu ruins?" This. Changhua naturally understood what Zhang was worried about. So, he immediately smiled and replied, "Mother, I came back especially to celebrate your birthday." Zhang seemed to want to say something else. Seeing this, Changhua directly held her arm and said with a smile, "Let's go. I'll help you back to the house first. Then, I'll tell you what happened in detail." The mother and son returned to the room. Then, under Zhang's incredulous gaze, Changhua recounted his experience during this period of time in detail. "You mean, after you met Mr. Chen, not only did he not kill you, and he even took the initiative to accept you as his disciple?" After listening to Chenghua's story, the expression on Zhang's face was very interesting. Mr. Chen's prestige was now a gold-plated signboard in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Everyone said that the Tianshu ruins were a forbidden area and that trespassers would die. Who would have thought that Changhua not only did not lose his life after trespassing into the Tianshu ruins, but also profited from the disaster and formed a good relationship with Mr. Chen. Mother, you might not understand, Mr. Chen did not accept me as his disciple, he only let me live in his house. When he was free, he would give me a few pointers. In order not to worry his mother, Changhua concealed most of the facts. He did not mention Qin Shueqing at all, so Zhang mistakenly thought that he had been accepted as a disciple by Chen Shi. Even if it was only a few pointers, it was still pointers from Ji Zun. Mr. Chen is a peerless master who can defeat the 4 perfected masters alone. Hua, you've bumped into a great opportunity. Zhang was very excited. Who knew what kind of great luck Changhua had had to be lucky enough to become Ji Zun's disciple? Looking at her son who was becoming more mature and steady, Zhang could not help but smile from the bottom of her heart. But immediately after, she seemed to have suddenly thought of something terrible, and a trace of worry flashed across her eyes. Chenghua's return was indeed a great thing. But, what should she do with the Holy Church? Unilaterally break the contract? Would she dare? Thinking of this, Zhang's heart could not help but sink, and she instantly became a little worried. Changhua was immersed in the joy of reuniting with his mother, so he did not notice the strange look on Zhang's face. He thought that Zhang was blaming him for trespassing on the Tianshu ruins, so he was thinking of something to say to make his mother happy. But at this moment, there was a sudden commotion outside the courtyard. A large group of people was seen hurrying towards Zhang's room. The leader was Genrio. Other than Chenghua's elder brother, Genyuan Zhengqi, who was with him, there was also the current head of the Xianyuan family, Xianyuan Wuwang. Chapter 5:10. Outside the courtyard. The head of the family and the 8 elders arrived together. From this, it could be seen how shocking the news of Changhua coming back alive from the Tianshu ruins was. Where is he? Xianyuan Wuwang looked to be about 60 years old. He was wearing an exquisite dark green robe with a simple jade pendant hanging from his waist. It was obvious that he was the one with the highest status in the group. This was Genrio's courtyard. Although Xianyuan Wuwang was the head of the family, the servants did not recognize him. After all, there was no television in the Supreme Palace enclosure. The guard didn't know Xianyuan Wuwang, but he vaguely recognized a few of the 8 elders. Therefore, when he heard Xianyuan Wuwang's seemingly random question, the guard was stunned. He didn't know how to answer at all. Seeing this, Genrio immediately walked out from the back of the group and quickly scolded in a low voice, "Fool, the head of the family is asking you a question. Why aren't you answering? Where did Changhua go?" After hearing the head of the family scolding, the guard replied with a look of realization, "Master, the second young master has been staying in the second madam's room ever since he came back. He did not go anywhere. All right, get out of here." The Xianyuan family was very large. If one had to describe it, the Xianyuan family could be considered a county. The head of the family was the county head, and the 8 elders were the mayors of the various towns. Now that the county head was here, it was understandable that the servants were slightly negligent. Although Genryo was very impressive all day, in front of the head of the family, he was very much like a bootlicker who only knew how to nod his head and bow his head. And this was the specialty of the Supreme Palace enclosure. That was, the feudal hierarchy. Under the rules of this system, the head of the family's authority could not be challenged. Fortunately, Xianyuan Wuwang seemed to be in a good mood today. Therefore, after hearing the guard's answer, Xianyuan Wuwang did not show any intention of blaming him. After casually waving his hand, he strode into the courtyard. When his entourage saw this, they all followed behind him and swarmed into the courtyard like a swarm of bees. At this time, Cheng Hua also heard the commotion outside the house. After signaling his mother not to get up, he walked to the door and pushed it open. At that moment, everyone's eyes were focused on him. This was Genryo's youngest son, Xianyuan Cheng Hua. A little brat who hadn't even had a coronation ceremony. If not for the fact that Cheng Hua had returned alive from the Tianshu ruins, most of the people present would have forgotten that Genryo had such an outstanding son. Hua, why aren't you kneeling down? According to the customs of the Supreme Palace enclosure, a crowning ceremony would be held at the age of 20, which was the so-called coming-of-age ceremony. Before the crowning ceremony was held, juniors like Cheng Hua did not even have the right to step into the ancestral hall of the clan. In the past, during the clan meeting, Cheng Hua often ran outside with his peers to peek at the meeting. Therefore, he knew the head of the family and the other elders. Therefore, after hearing Genryo's reminder, Cheng Hua immediately stopped on the steps and then bowed to the people in the courtyard. He clasped his fist and bowed. Cheng Hua is here to greet the head of the family, father, and elders. There was nothing wrong with Cheng Hua's words. However, his behavior was obviously very problematic. In front of the head of the family, as a junior, how could Cheng Hua not kneel? This was a great crime of disrespect. Genryo saw all of this, but as a father, he could only be anxious at the side and did not dare to say anything to remind him. Could it be that he had to remind the head of the family to punish Cheng Hua for his great disrespect? Genryo was very anxious in his heart. That was because he did not know that Cheng Hua had changed. Cheng Hua had been by Chen Shi's side for too long and had also lived for a long time in modern society. Therefore, unknowingly, Cheng Hua's understanding of this world had undergone a great change. The two of them are also human, everyone is equal, it's just a meal, what's the big deal? Come, sit down and eat together, try my cooking. Qin Shueqing did not allow the two of them to take half a step into the inner courtyard, but Chen Shi opened his mouth and let the two of them directly sit at the dining table. This was just a small matter, but this small matter left an extremely deep impression on Cheng Hua. From the daily diet to the leisure time, Chen Shi's every move affected him and Yi Ji almost all the time. The reason why they did not notice anything unusual in the past was that the two of them had not returned to the Supreme Palace enclosure yet. It was also because of this that when Cheng Hua returned this time, he realized that he seemed to be somewhat out of tune with the things around him. It was not that he did not know etiquette. It was purely that he did not want to kneel. Why are you kneeling? Stand up, haven't you heard that men have gold under their knees? Stand up straight for me. At this moment, Cheng Hua's mind was filled with a myriad of thoughts. So much so that he even started to miss Earth. Xianyuan Wuwang did not know what Cheng Hua was thinking. Moreover, he did not know what Cheng Hua was thinking at all. Yuan Liang, lead the way. Let's talk somewhere else. Xianyuan Wuwang came here today with a purpose, so he did not want to waste too much time on these trivial matters. At his command, the master let Genryo lead everyone to sit in the main hall of the courtyard one by one. After that, in front of everyone present, Changhua repeated everything he had just said to Zhang. His reaction was more or less the same as Zhang's. After everyone heard that Changhua had been living in Mr. Chen's house all this time, the expressions on their faces were as interesting as it could be. After Changhua roughly recounted his experience, he stood to the side and quietly waited for the master to ask questions. After pondering for a while, the master frowned and asked softly, "In other words, Mr. Chen has already taken you in?" It was no wonder that everyone understood this. After all, the Supreme Palace enclosure was not Earth. Other than Qin Shi, who would take a captive in their own house and provide them with good food and drinks? Master, Mr. Chen did not take me in as a disciple. He just let me live in his house and gave me a few pointers when he was free, Changhua tried his best to explain. Hearing this, Xianyuan Wuwang replied with a look of sudden realization, "I think it's because your cultivation levels are too low. Mr. Chen was afraid that you too would embarrass him, so he didn't give you a master and disciple status. If that's the case, you really can't claim to be his disciple." As soon as this was said, the 8 elders suddenly seemed to have figured something out. They could not help but nod in agreement. "Master, you're right." Seeing that this misunderstanding was getting bigger and bigger, Changhua hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he forced himself to swallow the words that had already been on the tip of his tongue. Anyway, there was nothing wrong with being Mr. Chen's disciple. Since everyone had to understand it this way, he could only let it be. At worst, he would go back and explain it to Mr. Chen properly. Anyway, he did not use Mr. Chen's name to swindle people everywhere. Changhua believed that he had a clear conscience, so he did not dwell on this issue any longer. Since Xianyuan Wuwang had asked what he wanted to ask and understood what he needed to understand, Changhua guessed that it was time for them to leave, so he tactfully excused himself and left the main hall. Of course, he did not go far. Instead, he waited silently outside the house so that he could send the elders off later. Changhua stood outside the door and waited, bored to death. However, at this moment, his name suddenly rang out in the main hall. "Yuanliang, you really have a good son. This child is called Changhua, right? What are his birth characters? Is he betrothed now? Coincidentally, I have a niece. She's 16 years old and has yet to be betrothed. I wonder, Yuanliang, are you willing to become my in-laws?" At that moment, Changhua felt as if a basin of cold water had been poured over him from head to toe. Before Genryo could even open his mouth to reply, he rushed into the main hall as if he had been electrocuted. Then, in front of the master, he shouted at everyone, "No." Chapter 5:11. No. Chenghua's sudden intrusion instantly interrupted everyone's conversation. Looking at his nervous and agitated expression, the patriarch did not directly reprimand him for his lack of manners. Instead, he asked with a smile, "Why not?" At that moment, everyone's eyes were focused on Changhua. That's right, why not? As the cultivation of an immortal cultivator increased, the probability of having children would gradually decline. Therefore, immortal cultivators would usually try to get married and have children as soon as possible before they made a major breakthrough in their cultivation, so as to avoid the tragedy of having no one to send them off in the future. Even young people like Changhua, who had not yet had a coronation ceremony, were mostly already married at this age. The meaning of life was to reproduce and multiply. In the words of the ancient people, it was, there were 3 ways to be unfilial, and the worst was to have no descendants. Because his eldest brother, Genyuan Zhengqi, had already gotten married and had 2 sons, Genryo did not urge Changhua to get married and have children. He had originally planned to wait until after Chenghua's coronation ceremony to find a good family for Changhua. Who would have thought that, after Chenghua's trip to the Tianshu ruins, he had become a hot commodity in everyone's eyes. In addition to a few elders who expressed their desire to become in-laws with him, it seemed that even the patriarch had this intention. Since ancient times, regardless of the social system, marriage was the most common way to establish relations. Since Chenghua had the title of Supreme Disciple, wouldn't a marriage alliance with him mean that they would suddenly have a huge backer behind them? Even if they accidentally provoked the 4 great spiritual masters of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven in the future, the 4 great spiritual masters would probably be a little more lenient on account of Great Supreme Master Chen. Therefore, even if Chenghua's behavior was a little rude, no one had the intention to blame him. Instead, they smiled and sized up Chenghua. After hearing the patriarch's question, Chenghua could not help but be stunned. He did not know why he objected to this suggestion. After all, cultivators were different from mortals. It would not be an exaggeration to describe the life of an immortal cultivator as a wandering and magnificent life. For immortal cultivators, the concept of home was more like an organization that they could rely on. Since a man could have 3 wives and 4 concubines. In other words, a woman could naturally have 3,000 male companions. The so-called love was stronger than gold and unswerving until death. This kind of thing did not work in the Supreme Palace enclosure at all. Chenghua hesitated, not knowing how to answer the patriarch's question. Seeing this, the clan head laughed and said, "Could it be that you already have someone in mind? Which family are you from? If you don't mind, this old man can be a matchmaker for you." After hearing the patriarch's words, Chenghua couldn't help but think of a cold and aloof figure. However, as that figure became clearer and clearer in his mind, Chenghua couldn't help but shudder. Then, he quickly replied, "Thank you for your concern, patriarch. It's not like I have someone in mind, it's just that. At this point, Chenghua couldn't help but pause for a moment. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he couldn't help but quickly add, "It's just that I haven't reached the age of 1 yet. That's why I haven't considered the personal matters of my children before. Now that I've suddenly heard the elders mention this matter, I can't help but feel a little uneasy in my heart. I hope the elders won't blame me." Since they were talking about marriage, Chenghua naturally had to act like a junior. Anyway, they were all family. There was nothing wrong with him calling himself the grandson in front of the patriarch. Using the reason that he was underage, Chenghua tactfully rejected the good intentions of the elders. But what he didn't expect was, after hearing his words, the patriarch still laughed and said, "The coronation ceremony is just a kind of ceremony. It just so happens that tomorrow is the 15th of the first lunar month. When the time comes, come to the ancestral temple and this old man will personally crown you. How about it?" Because there were too many people in the Xianyuan family, the coronation ceremony didn't happen immediately after the age of 20. Instead, it had to be done in batches. Usually, it would be chosen at an auspicious time, and the elders and deacons would perform the ceremony for the juniors. The higher the status of the person in the family, the more grand the coronation ceremony would be. For Chenghua to have the patriarch personally crown him in the ancestral temple was already a privilege that only the direct bloodline of the Xianyuan family could enjoy. Genryo relied on his cultivation to become one of the 8 elders. So, in terms of bloodline, Chenghua was far from being qualified to enter the ancestral temple. Therefore, it could be said that, the patriarch of the Xianyuan family was giving Chen Shi enough face. Seeing that the patriarch had said so, the elders all nodded in agreement. Seeing this, Chenghua seemed to be a little unwilling to give up and said, "When I left Tianshu, I promised Mr. Chen that I would only be back for 7 days. So, this marriage," Chenghua struggled hard. However, before he could finish his words, the patriarch interrupted him. 7 days? That's enough. When your wedding is over, I'll send someone to escort you all the way back to Tianshu. How about that? Let's settle this matter then. Yuan Liang, I'll leave this matter to you. Tomorrow morning, I'll perform the coronation ceremony for your good son at the ancestral temple." There was no room for negotiation at all. After saying this, the patriarch left the courtyard with his people. Only a dumbfounded Chonghua was left behind, as well as his excited old father. Coronation ceremony, marriage. At the same time, the status of the family rose sharply. Ever since Chonghua and Yi returned home, everything they experienced was so similar. The Tuoba family had already fallen. So, how could the Xianyuan family and the Dongfang family, who were also the three major families of Ningzhou, not be prepared at all? No matter what the relationship between the two of them and Mr. Chen. In short, it would not be wrong to please the two of them. Therefore, after the two of them went through a series of friendly greetings, they were pushed into the ancestral temple in a daze under the gaze of thousands of people. From the moment the two patriarchs personally held the coronation ceremony for the two of them, Chonghua and Yi officially set foot on the peak of their lives. It felt like a dream. Everything came so suddenly. In a daze, the two teenagers were in their own ancestral temples. At the same time, they put on the red and black crowns that were unique to adults. The ceremony is complete. Bow to the ancestors. As the ceremony was completed, there was a burst of lively cheers outside the ancestral temples of the Xianyuan and Dongfang families. People couldn't help but cheer for the crowns. It was as if there was only joy left in the world. However, no one would have thought, just as the two of them were about to complete their coronation ceremony, an earth-shattering sound suddenly came from the horizon. Boom! In an instant, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Evil wind blew. Chapter 5:12. The sudden turn of events alarmed everyone. The sun was still shining brightly earlier, but in the blink of an eye, the sky in the distance had become so gloomy that it was about to rain. Seeing that a storm was about to come, the people outside the ancestral temple could not help but whisper to each other. What's going on? The weather is so abnormal. Did something big happen in the Jade Clear Grotto heaven? Like the Great World, there were no stars near the Supreme Palace enclosure, so the changes in the weather and the movement of the sun and moon were all controlled by the formation. The core of the Supreme Palace enclosure's formation was in the Jade Clear Grotto heaven. Now that the weather had suddenly changed, the first reaction of the people present was to guess if something had happened in the Jade Clear Grotto heaven. Thick black clouds covered the entire sky, and the sky was as dark as ink that had dripped into water. Looking from afar, the black clouds surged over one after another, like the ferocious and terrifying faces of monsters. Like the low growl of a vicious dog before it pounced on its prey, the thunder in the sky accumulated power for a while before it suddenly burst out with an earth-shattering sound. Rumble! Rumble! In an instant, the thunder rumbled, and the wind howled. In front of such a terrifying scene, no one had any intention of hiding. Instead, they all looked up at the distant sky. In the ancestral temple. The moment Xianyuan Wuwang heard the thunder, he stopped the warning and blessing he was about to say to Chonghua. Instead, he quickly walked out of the ancestral temple with a serious face. When the 8 elders saw this, they all followed behind him and walked out of the ancestral temple. Chonghua was supposed to be the main character of today's ceremony. However, the moment the thunder sounded, he completely became a side character that no one cared about. Seeing that no one cared about him, Chonghua did not bother to care about the complicated etiquette. He directly took off the white crown on his head and hugged it in his arms. Then, he quietly moved to Genrio's side. Father, did something big happen? The patriarch and the 8 grand elders stood proudly on the steps facing the demonic wind. After hearing Chonghua's question, Genrio frowned and glared at him. He then quickly scolded him in a low voice, "Silence." Oh, okay. Chonghua had never seen such a scene before. Therefore, when he heard Genrio's reprimand, he could only shrink his head in confusion and obediently stand behind the crowd, not daring to make any noise. Rumble! Rumble! The sound of rolling thunder reverberated in the air. One after another, there was not a single moment of rest. It lasted for about 2 minutes before the deafening thunder gradually subsided. What's going on? Like Chenghua, most of the young people outside the ancestral temple had blank looks on their faces. They had no idea what had just happened. Chenghua stole a glance at his father. He realized that his father's expression was somewhat strange. There was a hint of nervousness, excitement, and even a hint of excitement. Could it be, something good was about to happen? In the past, Chenghua would not have the right to stand on the steps outside the ancestral temple. Today, he had a rare opportunity to do so. Naturally, he wanted to experience the feeling of standing at the top. However, at this moment, the patriarch of the Xianyuan family and the 8 grand elders, who were standing at the front, suddenly knelt on one knee and shouted in unison, "Yes, Zhenren." Seeing this, Chenghua was stunned. This was because he had no idea what had just happened. Seeing the patriarch of the Xianyuan family and the 8 grand elders kneeling on the ground, Chenghua was stunned for a moment. He could only follow suit and kneel down immediately. However, the moment he knelt down, the patriarch of the Xianyuan family and the 8 grand elders stood up again. This was great. Chenghua did not know whether he should kneel or stand now. Forget it. This is fate. It can't be changed. Yuan Liang, explain to this child first. If Mr. Chen wants to blame someone in the future, I don't think he will be the one to blame. The dark clouds in the sky did not disperse, and the thunder stopped. The patriarch of the Xianyuan family looked at Chenghua with a complicated expression and shook his head gently. Then, he led the rest of the elders back to the ancestral temple. Explain? Explain what? Hearing this, Chenghua could not help but feel confused. He was about to ask when Genrio's voice suddenly rang in his head. It was a voice transmission. His father was transmitting a voice transmission to him. After listening to Genrio's explanation, Chenghua finally understood what had just happened. So, the thunder just now was not a natural phenomenon. It was caused by the thunder drum of the jade clear grotto heaven. The so-called thunder drum was a special method used by the jade clear grotto heaven to transmit information to the various forces in the Supreme Palace enclosure. It was roughly equivalent to the radio station on Earth, and it was the encrypted kind. Only when one's cultivation reached a certain level could they hear the message that the jade clear grotto heaven wanted to transmit from the thunder. The reason why the jade clear grotto heaven suddenly sounded the thunder drum today was completely because a grand event that happened once in 100 years was coming. What was a grand event? The meeting of the 3 enclosures was a grand event. Chenghua had heard many rumors about the 3 enclosures since he was young. The so-called 3 enclosures were the Supreme Palace enclosure, the Crepe Myrtle enclosure, and the Heavenly Market enclosure. Legend had it that a long time ago, the 3 enclosures were originally a complete planet. Later on, something happened that caused the planet to be torn apart and turned into the 3 enclosures of today. Like the Supreme Palace enclosure, the Crepe Myrtle enclosure and the Heavenly Market enclosure were also plate-shaped landmasses that had been drifting in this vast universe for thousands of years. Because there were no stars to guide them, there was no trace of the 3 enclosures' whereabouts. The Supreme Palace enclosure was now near the solar system. Perhaps the Supreme Palace enclosure was still on the other side of the Milky Way 100,000 years ago. The 3 enclosures would meet once every 100 years, and the principle of its operation was still unknown. According to the speculation of a senior expert in the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, the reason why the 3 enclosures would meet at regular intervals should be related to the arrangements left behind by the ancient powerhouses. In other words, the 3 enclosures were still hiding some shocking secrets that had not been discovered by anyone. In order to uncover this secret, since the establishment of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, its successive sect masters had been secretly searching for the truth. After various efforts, they finally found a clue. This clue came from Great Illusionary Land. Chenghua knew about the 3 enclosures, but he had never heard of the Great Illusionary Land. Therefore, after hearing this term, he could not help but interrupt Genrio and ask directly, "Father, I still don't understand what you mean. This great illusionary land, what does it have to do with me?" Hearing this, a meaningful smile suddenly appeared on Genrio's face. He reached out and patted Cheng Hua's shoulder, then whispered in Cheng Hua's ear, "Hua, prepare well, your opportunity is here." Chapter 513. For a junior like Cheng Hua, the Great Illusionary Land was an extremely unfamiliar term. However, for existences like Genrio and even the Xianyuan family head, the Great Illusionary Land was a good place that symbolized opportunities and fortuitous encounters. Although the Great Illusionary Land was a specific name, it did not have a specific address. That was because the address it appeared at every time was not fixed. The Great Illusionary Land would only appear briefly in a thick fog on the day when the three enclosures converged. Every 100 years, the three enclosures would gradually get closer and more or less joined together under the influence of an unknown force. Just like Asia, America, and Europe, if a sea was filled in between the three enclosures, then one could roughly see its original appearance when looking from afar in the starry sky. Once upon a time, it was also a complete planet. Every time the three enclosures converged, the fluctuation of the spirit energy of heaven and earth would become unusually intense, so much so that the spirit energy would gradually form a fog that would gradually cover the entire sky. At this time, one only needed to follow the spirit energy all the way. The place with the densest spirit energy would be the place where the Great Illusionary Land appeared. Unlike the unknown dangers of the Tianshu ruins, the Great Illusionary Land had real benefits. Genrio had a deep understanding of this problem. After all, if he had not been lucky enough to obtain the qualifications to enter the Great Illusionary Land and obtained many benefits from it, then Genrio, who was only from a collateral bloodline, would not have been able to sit in the position of the 8 great elders. At this point, it was necessary to first mention the so-called social resources and class consolidation. In fact, whether it was Earth or the Great Illusionary Land, except for some lucky people who were favored by the heavens, it was actually very difficult for ordinary people to climb from the bottom of society to the top of society. The Great Illusionary Land did not have a college entrance examination, so the Great Illusionary Land was the only way for everyone to reach the top in one step. Once one entered the Great Illusionary Land, all the opportunities and fortuitous encounters were in front of one's eyes. But it was a pity. The Great Illusionary Land could only allow 3,000 people to enter at a time. 3,000 people sounded like a lot. However, if it was placed in the entire Great Illusionary Land, this number was too small. Just Ning State alone had the Xianyuan, Dongfang, and Tuoba families, as well as many slightly weaker mid-sized families. Moreover, besides the Ning Prefecture, there were still 8 other prefectures in the Supreme Palace enclosure that weren't inferior to the Ning Prefecture at all. Since everyone wanted to go in and get a share of the pie, then these 3,000 spots naturally needed to be properly distributed. Thus, with the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven taking the lead, the slots were accurately allocated to the various forces according to their overall strength. The thunderclap drum earlier was actually an announcement to the various great powers about the number of slots they would be able to obtain this time. This was the fundamental reason why Cheng Hua had never heard of the existence of the Great Illusionary Land before. The quota was limited. Therefore, the fewer people who knew about the existence of the Great Illusionary Realm, the better. Otherwise, wouldn't those bumpkins from small families rebel against the heavens and swarm into the Great Illusionary Realm to change their fates? Therefore, it could be said that, this was a carnival for the upper class of the Supreme Palace enclosure, and it had nothing to do with the general public. It was probably because the Tuoba family had suffered a heavy blow a few days ago, so during the distribution this time, the Xianyuan family and the Dongfang family were both given 3 slots, one more than before. Regarding this, the Xianyuan family patriarch was naturally overjoyed, so he immediately returned to the ancestral temple and used the excuse of inspecting the cultivation progress of his clansmen as an excuse to launch a large clan meeting that involved the entire Xianyuan family. Although it was called a large clan meeting, it was actually a martial arts competition. Anyone whose cultivation was above the Golden Core realm and below the Yuanying realm could sign up. As long as one obtained the top 3, they would be allowed to enter the Great Illusionary Realm. What needed to be mentioned here was, there was no requirement to enter the Great Illusionary Realm. Even the Yuanying and Soul Formation cultivators could enter at will. However, as long as one Soul Formation cultivator entered the Great Illusionary Realm, then the 3,000 spots would immediately be reduced to 2,000, or even less. According to past experience, it was basically certain that the benefits of entering the Great Illusionary Realm with 3,000 Golden Core cultivators were the greatest. Therefore, the Golden Core cultivators became the key targets of the various forces. Only the strongest among them were qualified to enter the Great Illusionary Realm. Chenghua's cultivation was only at the middle stage of the Golden Core realm. Logically speaking, he was not qualified to know the inside story in advance. Considering that his master was the great Supreme Chen, the patriarch could not help but place high hopes on him. After all, he was the disciple of the Supreme Chen. Although his cultivation was slightly lower, with his actual combat ability, he should not be too bad, right? However, nobody would have thought, after hearing Genrio's words, Chenghua said hesitantly, "Father, can I not participate?" "What?" Genrio looked as if he had seen a ghost. It should be noted that the reason why Chenghua's elder brother did not enter the Great Illusionary Realm back then was that there was no third spot, so he could only stay in the top 3. Now that there was an extra spot, Chenghua actually wanted to give it up directly. Was there a mistake? Thinking of this, Genrio only felt a surge of anger in his heart rushing to his head. However, considering that this matter could not be forced, after taking a deep breath, Genrio forced himself to calm down and said, "Why don't you want to participate?" "Mr. Chen only gave me 7 days." Seeing his father's unfriendly expression, Chenghua could only answer honestly, "After 7 days, I must return to Tianshu, otherwise, with Mr. Chen's temperament, it's very likely that he will personally come to the Supreme Palace enclosure to ask me to return." After hearing the 3 words, Mr. Chen, Genrio's eyelids twitched obviously. With the Tuoba family as an example, nobody dared to provoke Mr. Chen in Tianshu. However, was this really going to be a waste of this opportunity? Hua, you have to think carefully. Some people are willing to waste 100 years and force themselves to stay in this realm with the purpose of exploring the Great Illusionary Land. Although you are a disciple of a supreme being, what Mr. Chen can give you may not be as much as what the Great Illusionary Land can give you. When the 4 words, Great Illusionary Land, were mentioned, Genrio's face clearly flashed with a strange light. However, due to some unspoken agreement, he could not tell Chenghua what exactly was in the Great Illusionary Land. Moreover, are you so sure that you can easily win the first place and obtain a spot to enter the Great Illusionary Land? After hearing Genrio say this, Chenghua was stunned for a moment. That's right. Ever since he found out that he had to compete to obtain a spot, Chenghua's first reaction was that he could not participate. Otherwise, if he did not return to Tianshu on time, Mr. Chen would definitely be angry. In Chenghua's subconscious mind, as long as he participated in the clan meeting, then he would definitely be able to defeat everyone and successfully obtain the qualification to enter the Great Illusionary Land. He seemed to be a little too confident. Chapter 5:14. Due to the lack of time, the Patriarch immediately announced the start of the Great Clan meeting after receiving the news from the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. This was a grand event that concerned the future of the Xianyuan family. In this grand event, regardless of whether it was the Xianyuan family's collateral bloodline, or the relatives who were related to the Xianyuan family through marriage, or even some criminals who had violated the family rules, regardless of birth or background. As long as one's cultivation was above the golden core stage and below the yuanying stage, one would be qualified to participate in the Great Clan Meeting. Of course, most people did not know what the Great Clan Meeting meant because the Great Illusionary Realm was too far away for them. But even so, everyone wanted to do their best in this Great Clan Meeting and strive to get a good ranking. This grand event was not only related to the Great Illusionary Realm, but also related to everyone's status in the family. Just like how ancient emperors would always pardon the world before they ascended the throne, at this moment, it did not matter whether one was born poor or guilty. As long as they could get a good ranking in the Great Clan Meeting, they could use this opportunity to reverse their previous fate. It could be said that this was the true meaning: the fish leaped over the dragon's gate, and the sky was vast. Therefore, the Great Clan Meeting was actually equivalent to Wuxia's college entrance exam. It was even fairer than the college entrance exam. Everything depended on one's strength. Qin Shueqing had never been to the Great Palace enclosure, so she did not know how much time would be wasted on the journey from Earth to the Great Palace enclosure. The so-called 7-day deadline was just something she said casually. Regarding this, Chen Shi was more magnanimous. Considering the long journey, when Cheng Hua and Yiji left, he even very considerately reminded them that the 7-day deadline would start from the day they reached home. Today was the second day after Cheng Hua's return. He originally wanted to go home and accompany his mother, but he did not expect that as soon as he got home, his schedule would be packed. He really did not have a moment to rest. Under Genrio's constant persuasion, Cheng Hua finally signed up for the Great Clan Meeting after some hesitation. After all, it was rare for the clan gathering to be held, so he wanted to use this opportunity to see how much he had improved. If he didn't make any progress, he really wouldn't have the face to see Chen Shi. Under the constant urging of the patriarch, the efficiency of the stewards in the clan instantly rose to the highest level. Therefore, in less than half a day's time, this highly anticipated clan gathering ushered in its first competition. Unlike many of the spectators, Cheng Hua did not show any excitement on his face. Instead, he stood beside the ring with a calm expression, silently watching the two parties fighting on the ring. It was as if everything had nothing to do with him. What we need to take note of here is, although the entry requirements were limited to those above the Golden Core stage and below the Yuanying stage, there was no age limit. The strength of an Aurus Core stage cultivator who had cultivated for 100 years and an Aurus Core stage cultivator who had cultivated for 500 years were naturally incomparable. Because of this, many of the bold fellows who had been cultivating bitterly for their entire lives but were still unable to enter the Yuanying realm were extremely excited when they heard that the clan leader was going to hold a clan meeting. As long as they could achieve a certain result in the meeting, the clan would definitely notice them. At that time, wouldn't the Yuanying stage be just around the corner? Everyone wanted to do their best for their own future, so the ruthlessness of this clan meeting was far beyond everyone's expectations. Perhaps it was because they wanted to eliminate the weak as soon as possible. Therefore, in the previous few competitions, there was no real sense of parity. Instead, most of the time, it was peak Aurus Core stage cultivators against early Aurus Core stage cultivators. Such a deliberate arrangement not only ensured that the peak Aurus Core stage cultivators could enter the final round with the strongest form, but also eliminated the weak as quickly as possible. Why not? However, what was surprising was that even if it was always early Aurus Core stage cultivators against peak Aurus Core stage cultivators, there had never been a situation where the early Aurus Core stage cultivators gave up without a fight. There were even a few times when the early Aurus Core stage cultivators almost made a comeback. So what if they were peak Aurus Core stage cultivators? It was just a battle, what was there to be afraid of? Regardless of their cultivation level, everyone gave it their all in order to obtain a better ranking for themselves. If it wasn't for the clan meeting's explicit prohibition against self-detonating magic treasures, it was estimated that the arena would have been filled with crackling sounds. When night fell, Cheng Hua finally welcomed his first battle. His cultivation was at the middle Aurus Core stage. Now that even he was on the stage, it meant that the early Oris Core stage cultivators had basically been eliminated, and it was time for the middle Oris Core stage cultivators. Cheng Hua's opponent was an elder from a collateral branch. Because the news of Cheng Hua going to the Tianshu ruins was not publicized, most people did not know that he now had another identity. But even if he did not have the identity of the supreme disciple, Cheng Hua was still Genrio's second son. So when he just appeared, it caused a big commotion. The patriarch seemed to be very interested in Cheng Hua's experience during this period, so he wanted to see what exactly he had learned under Chen Shi. Therefore, after hearing the news of Cheng Hua's appearance, the patriarch immediately led the 8 elders to the arena where Cheng Hua was. In the arena, Cheng Hua and the elder stood facing each other. The elder did not know Cheng Hua, but he had learned about Cheng Hua's identity from the onlookers, so he was extremely polite as soon as he came up. "I'm older than you, young master. Now that I have the honor of exchanging pointers with you, please make your move first." As he spoke, the old man took out his Dharma treasure. It was a simple long saber, and its rank was a third-grade spirit treasure. At first glance, one could tell that it was a collection of the elders for many years. If Cheng Hua's phoenix perch scorched tail box was still there, then this long saber was naturally not a good item. According to the usual practice, the two sides should introduce their magic treasures before exchanging pointers. Therefore, the elder roughly introduced his long saber. He estimated that with Cheng Hua's identity, his third-grade spirit treasure would not be good enough for him. Who would have thought, after hearing his introduction, Cheng Hua shook his head directly, and then said calmly, "I won't use my magic treasure. Please make your move." At that moment, not only was the elder on the arena stunned, but even Genrio, who was flying in the sky, was also surprised. How could this child be so arrogant? Not using his phoenix perch scorched tail box, he actually wanted to fight against a peak golden elixir with his bare hands? Could a supreme disciple be so arrogant? Regarding this question, Genrio had wronged Cheng Hua. Because he did not know, not using magic treasures had long been a tradition of the Sai courtyard. The one who really made Cheng Hua decide not to rely on magic treasures to fight was actually not Qin Shueqing, who had entered the Dao through martial arts, but Chen Shi. As the saying went, loud voices come from afar, not from the autumn wind. You are just ordinary people. How can you understand great Supreme Master Chen's painstaking efforts? Chapter 5:15. Cheng Hua had also consulted Chen Shi many times when he was in a good mood regarding cultivation. Chen Shi was a supreme martial artist, so his answers were unquestionable truth to Cheng Hua. There were 8 methods of immortals, pills, talismans, weapon arrays, and witchcraft. Earth originally lacked the corresponding inheritance and materials, so there were very few rare and strange magic treasures. Even if there were 1 or 2, most of them were old antiques passed down from ancient times. The Supreme Palace enclosure was different from Earth. It had not experienced many changes, so compared to Earth, which lacked the inheritance of the 8 methods, the Supreme Palace enclosure was actually more like the United States, where weapons were not banned. Magic treasures were just consumer goods that could be seen everywhere. This was the reason why Qin Shueqing did not like to use magic treasures. On one hand, it was because she entered the Dao through martial arts, and her body was her most powerful weapon. On the other hand, it was completely because she had never come into contact with magic treasures. Since she had never come into contact with them, how could she understand the benefits? If it was normal that Qin Shueqing did not like to use magic treasures, then Chen Shi, who also did not like to use magic treasures, was obviously a little abnormal. Cheng Hua had always thought that if the phoenix perch scorched tail box was still in his hands, Qin Shueqing could not possibly be his opponent. Therefore, after he was beaten up by Qin Shueqing, he had a discussion with Chen Shi about whether magic treasures were important or not. The result was naturally very obvious. From then on, Cheng Hua was infected with the bad habit of not liking to use magic treasures. In fact, with Chen Shi's current cultivation, if he really wanted to obtain a magic treasure that suited him, it would not be difficult at all. He did not even need to spend much effort to find the materials. He only needed to take a stroll in the jade-clear cave heaven with the title of Supreme Martial Artist Tian Shu. There were so many treasures in there, so why couldn't he just casually pick one? As long as it was not some sect guarding treasure, would the four perfected masters not even give this little face? So in the end, it was just that Chen Shi himself did not want it. Just like the words he always said, there is no other reason other than the sword in your heart. Magic treasures were indeed very useful. Some magic treasures were even more powerful than the cultivator's own strength. But even so, what could they do? No matter how strong the magic treasure in his hand was, this power was still just an external force. Personal strength was the foundation of an immortal cultivator. Blindly pursuing the grade of magic treasures and neglecting one's own strength, wasn't such behavior already inferior? You don't understand? It's fine. Let me ask you the simplest question. Didn't you have a 9th grade spirit treasure previously? If the current you with your bare hands were to face the you who used to have a 9th grade spirit treasure, then do you think, which period would you be more powerful? With that, Chen Shi smiled mysteriously and patted Cheng Hua's shoulder. This scene also left a deep impression on Cheng Hua. Actually, this thing is just like dating. The one that suits you is the best. Though the Phoenix Perch Scorched Tail box is good, it does not suit you. Also, if you rely too much on external forces, other than being able to kill a few more people, it does not help your cultivation at all. So, before you truly find a Dharma treasure that suits you, I suggest that you be yourself first. After Chen Shi's advice, Cheng Hua finally understood. This sword, it was both in his hand and in his heart. When he did not have a sword in his hand, it was time for him to take out the sword in his heart. No magic treasures? After hearing Cheng Hua's words, the elder's eyes flashed with joy. One had to know that the competition schedule of the clan gathering was very tight. The competition was basically one after another. There was not enough time to rest and recuperate. If he went through a fierce battle right after he appeared, then even if he could successfully enter the final round, his performance would be greatly reduced. And if he could obtain victory at the lowest cost and then face opponents of the same level in his peak state, his chances of winning would naturally increase by 30%. To the elder, the clan gathering was the only chance for him to make a comeback. Therefore, just as Cheng Hua finished speaking, the elder pretended to be in a difficult position and replied, "Since young master is so confident, I can only accept your favor. Young master, be careful. I am about to make my move. This move is called Wave Fanyun. Please enlighten me, young master." Even though the old man was calling himself a young master, the long saber in his hand danced with vigor and vigor. Although this move was called Wave Fanyun, it had nothing to do with water. As he waved the long saber in his hand, a streak of fire covered half of the arena like a cloud in the evening. This brat. How can he be so careless? In mid-air. Seeing the elder attack with all his might, Genryo was so angry that he trembled. Middle stage golden elixir against peak stage golden elixir. His opponent had clearly allowed him to make the first move, but Cheng Hua insisted on being careless. Not only did he not use his Dharma treasure, he even allowed the elder to make the first move. What was this if not courting death? If not for the clan leader beside him, Genryo would have even appeared and reprimanded Cheng Hua. Genryo was extremely anxious, but the clan leader was extremely calm. It was unknown whether he had confidence in Cheng Hua or in Great Supreme Chen. In short, when the clan leader saw Genryo fidgeting, he immediately waved his hand and calmly comforted him, "Yuan Liang, don't be anxious. Let's watch first." The result was just as the clan leader expected. Just when everyone thought that Cheng Hua would be defeated by the elder in one move, Cheng Hua made his move. They saw, in the face of the raging flames that covered the sky, Cheng Hua did not retreat. Instead, he moved forward. In an instant, like a bullet, he passed through the sea of flames and came to the elder's side at the fastest speed. Before the elder could even react, Cheng Hua's fist brought along a strong gust of wind and smashed towards his head. A long punch from a distance and a short punch from close range. This? At that moment, not only did the elder not react, even the clan leader and the 8 elders who were watching from the side were stunned. Was this the move that Cheng Hua learned from the Supreme Chen? But why did this move seem so strange? Bang! With a muffled sound, Cheng Hua's fist made close contact with the elder's forehead. Cheng Hua had been preparing for this punch for a long time. Previously, when he stood still, he seemed to be careless. In fact, he had been observing the elder's aura and flaws. Lang Fanyun? The name sounded nice, but the move was flashy and impractical. Although the flames in the sky looked scary, the real threat to Cheng Hua was the long saber hidden in the flames. Therefore, Cheng Hua only needed to find the path of the saber and successfully avoid it. Naturally, he could easily come to the elder's side. As a result, under everyone's dumbfounded expression, Cheng Hua's fists were like a storm, crazily smashing on the old man's protective shield. Bang! 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 Chapter 5:16. Punching the Nanshan nursing home and kicking the Beihai kindergarten. Wasn't such an absurd and ridiculous scene happening right in front of everyone's eyes? Cheng Hua had almost perfectly inherited Qin Shueqing's lifelong learning. Therefore, as soon as this move, which was very characteristic of Earth, appeared, it immediately caused a big sensation in the crowd. Since the day the 3 enclosures split apart, no one had ever seen such a shameless and strange move. Shouldn't the so-called immortal cultivators be like the immortals in the myths and legends, walking, sitting, and lying, showing the true colors of immortals? Immortals couldn't be like street gangsters, chasing each other with clubs and machetes, right? Therefore, when immortal cultivators fought with each other, most of them would only use magic treasures or spells to fight from a long distance. Here, ancient military formations could be used as an example. In a war, it wasn't just about which side had more people. If the cultivation of immortal cultivators was compared to the number of soldiers, then the magic treasures and moves they used when fighting were the tactical strategies arranged by the commander of the military formation. On the battlefield, the situation was changing rapidly. There were always many factors that could affect the outcome of a battle. Even if one side had few soldiers and was far less powerful than the opponent, before the real fight, no one could guarantee that the weak side would lose. The family head hoped that Cheng Hua could bring him a certain surprise. But what he never expected was, Cheng Hua not only brought him a surprise, but also a certain degree of surprise. Even if Cheng Hua had used tricks such as straw boats to borrow arrows and fire to achieve a narrow victory, the family head wouldn't be surprised at all. After all, Cheng Hua was the disciple of the Supreme Being. However, Cheng Hua had used a completely unimaginable way to win the battle in a one-sided manner. My younger brother, Zhang Yi, took the head of a general among millions of soldiers as easily as taking something out of his pocket. He single-handedly attacked the enemy's den. This was Cheng Hua's tactic. There weren't so many flashy moves, and there weren't so many strange movements. There were only punches to the flesh, as well as repeated attacks that accurately hit the same position. And under this storm-like attack, soon, the old man's protective shield was broken. Boom! A strong gust of wind suddenly rose from the stage, and the old man's body was like a sandbag filled with cement, heavily smashing into the stage. From beginning to end, this unlucky Peak Jindan stage cultivator had never fought back even once. On one hand, it was because the rules of the competition forbade the use of defensive treasures. On the other hand, it was completely because he didn't react in time. Cough, cough, young master, you're so capable. This old man admits defeat. Looking at the expressionless Cheng Hua, the old man hesitated for a moment before shaking his head with a bitter smile. This was an arena competition. Methods such as self-detonating his golden core and burning his blood essence could not be used. Therefore, the moment the protective shield was broken, the old man had already lost the chance to make a comeback. Unless Cheng Hua was willing to give him time to adjust his breathing and wait until he was ready to fight again, otherwise, if he continued to hold on, what awaited the old man was destined to be humiliation. Thank you for letting me win. Hearing the old man admit defeat, Cheng Hua cupped his fists and bowed to him, then slowly walked down the stage. When the audience below the stage saw Cheng Hua come down, they immediately divided into two lines and made a VIP passage for him. At that moment, the entire audience was silent. The crowd silently watched Cheng Hua. After his figure gradually disappeared into the distance, the crowd was like startled birds in the forest, and began to discuss excitedly. What's going on? He won just like that? A middle Jindan stage cultivator against a peak Jindan stage cultivator, and he won so easily? What kind of moves did they use, did you understand? Why do I feel like I didn't see anything? Looking at the audience below who were fiercely discussing the battle situation, Xianyuan Wuwang suddenly couldn't help but laugh. Yuan Liang, your second son is really lucky. After saying that, without waiting for Genrio to reply, the family head had already left with an enigmatic smile on his face. Genrio looked at the stage below thoughtfully, but he suddenly had more expectations for this precious son of his. This was the move that the Supreme Being taught? It seemed simple, but it was very effective. Of course, with Genrio's cultivation, it was not difficult to see, Cheng Hua's victory in this competition was mainly due to the point of winning by surprise. Presumably, his next opponent would be prepared in advance after hearing that Cheng Hua had such a strange technique, so it was basically impossible for him to catch them off guard again. He didn't know what kind of surprise Cheng Hua would bring to him in the next competition. Thinking of this, even Genrio, who had always been serious, showed a faint smile at this moment. His son had done well, and as the father, he also felt proud. Immortal cultivators did not need to rest. Therefore, from the moment it started, the gathering had to continue until the end. Following this, Cheng Hua went through another 2 rounds of competition. However, the opponents in these 2 matches were weaker than the old man from before. Therefore, Cheng Hua did not spend much effort and easily defeated the 2 of them. By noon the next day, most of the weaker cultivators had been eliminated, and the competition officially entered the white-hot stage. Cheng Hua's 4th match was against a middle golden elixir stage cultivator. This middle golden elixir stage cultivator was incredible. Because he was of the direct bloodline, he even called the current family head uncle. The Xianyuan family had many members, and this person was older than Cheng Hua by 20 years, so Cheng Hua did not recognize him. Of course, Cheng Hua could not be bothered to recognize him. Speaking of which, it was strange, unknowingly, that rash and willful Xianyuan Cheng Hua had now become much more low-key. Therefore, in the face of this direct bloodline cultivator's provocation, Cheng Hua did not even have much of an emotional fluctuation. He only treated the other party as a moving sandbag that could be easily crushed. As a result, Cheng Hua entered the final round just like that without any suspense. The family head was not very satisfied with this result. Because Cheng Hua had not displayed any moves other than martial arts. Moreover, he was very curious about what Cheng Hua had learned from Great Supreme Chen. Therefore, in order to let Cheng Hua display his full strength, the family head decided to play some underhanded tricks. He ordered people to replace the opponent that Cheng Hua was supposed to encounter, and put the person who was recognized as the strongest in this meeting in front of Cheng Hua in advance. This person's name was Xianyuan Wuhan. He was of the direct bloodline, and his cultivation was at the peak of the golden elixir stage. However, although Xianyuan Wuhan's cultivation was high, what was truly frightening about him was actually his age. Because this year, he was already 233 years old. Chapter 5:17. Xianyuan Wuhan. Whenever this name was mentioned in the Xianyuan clan, everyone would have some impression of him. Because he was already 230 years old this year. Furthermore, this was already the third time Xianyuan Wuhan had participated in the clan gathering. According to common sense, if he hadn't stepped into yuanying when he was 200 or 300 years old, this kind of cultivation talent wasn't too bad. Yuanying wasn't that easy to condense. Many people spent their entire lives and might never be able to step over that threshold. However, Xianyuan Wuhan's situation was obviously a bit special. As a direct descendant of the Xianyuan clan, he had enjoyed unimaginable cultivation resources since he was young. Therefore, to a second-generation young master like Xianyuan Wuhan who was still stuck in the Aurus core stage when he was 200 or 300 years old, this was actually a rather humiliating thing. Could it be because Xianyuan Wuhan's cultivation talent was too bad? However, the truth was exactly the opposite. In fact, Xianyuan Wuhan's cultivation talent, even when placed in the entire Xianyuan clan, could be considered as one of the top few. This was a genius who had fallen. How high-spirited was the Xianyuan Wuhan of the past? When he participated in the clan gathering for the first time, his radiance was as dazzling as the afternoon sun, to the extent that bystanders couldn't even look straight at him. He was like the sun and moon in the sky, anyone could only be overshadowed in front of him. Therefore, when Xianyuan Wuhan easily won the first place with his absolute tyrannical strength, everyone thought that he would be another rising star of the Xianyuan clan, even possibly becoming the next celestial lord of the Tuoba clan. However, no one would have thought that, in the following 100 years, Xianyuan Wuhan's cultivation actually didn't have the slightest bit of progress. When he participated in the clan gathering for the first time, his cultivation was already at the peak of the Aurus core stage. 100 years had passed. At the start of the second clan gathering, everyone actually saw his figure on the stage again. The bystanders were shocked by Xianyuan Wuhan's stagnation, but the young talents who competed with him in the same period felt even more despair and helplessness. Why did this grandson come again? Even if Xianyuan Wuhan's performance in the second clan gathering was even more outstanding, everyone only felt that everything was to be expected. In any case, if they met him again, they would just directly admit defeat. Perhaps others could participate in the clan gathering for the second or third time. Only Xianyuan Wuhan could not. 100 years ago, Chenghua's elder brother, Genyuan Jingqi, was defeated by Xianyuan Wuhan. 100 years later, Genyuan Jingqi had already stepped into the yuanying realm, but Xianyuan Wuhan was still stuck in the gold core realm. It was precisely because of this, Xianyuan Wuhan had completely fallen from the altar. Even if no one at the same level could defeat him, no one would submit to him from the bottom of their hearts. However, Xianyuan Wuhan remained unmoved by the suspicions and slander of the outside world. After every clan meeting, he would disappear from everyone's sight. No one knew what he had been doing for the past 100 years, but as long as the great clan gathering began, everyone would think of this name. Xianyuan Wuhan. Because everyone wanted to know, another 100 years had passed. Was Xianyuan Wuhan still at the peak of Jindan realm? As long as he remained in the Aurus core stage, he would always be the most talked about topic. The result was just as everyone expected. Xianyuan Wuhan came again. This was his third time participating in the great clan gathering. Along the way, many of the competitors who were unfortunate enough to meet him didn't even bother to step onto the stage, and directly stood below the stage to admit defeat. And this situation continued until Chenghua appeared. When Chenghua stepped onto the stage expressionlessly, including the manager who presided over this competition, almost everyone was shocked. On the stage. After Chenghua stood still, Xianyuan Wuhan, who usually didn't like to speak much, took the initiative to speak for the first time. "I've seen your competition before. You have a lot of potential." Hearing this, Changhua couldn't help but stare blankly for a moment, then he smiled and said, "Thank you for your attention, Mr. Wuhan." Changhua is very grateful. As the saying goes, the one who reaches the top comes first. Before an immortal cultivator was sure of the difference in seniority between them, they would usually address the other party as Mr. or Senior. Therefore, it wasn't a problem for Changhua to address Xianyuan Wuhan as Mr. "The moves you used in the previous few competitions were very strange. Every move you made seemed simple, but in fact, it contained some kind of truth." Perhaps Xianyuan Wuhan also knew why he would suddenly meet Changhua, so he didn't immediately start fighting as he usually did. Instead, he took the initiative to chat with Changhua. The scene didn't seem to be as hostile as people imagined. Changhua was about to reply, but unexpectedly, Xianyuan Wuhan suddenly changed the topic. He suddenly used a lifeless tone and calmly said, "But, the realm of this cultivation technique isn't high. Although it's very ingenious, it's only limited to this. If you only rely on this cultivation technique, you shouldn't be able to last more than 10 moves against me, so I suggest you, either directly admit defeat, or take out some of your trump cards. Let me have a good feel of it. What's so special about the inheritance of the sovereign bloodline?" Xianyuan Wuhan didn't say the last sentence in front of everyone. Instead, he used the secret method of telepathy to send it directly to Changhua's ears. Obviously, this brother was very clear about Changhua's background. The reason why he was willing to talk nonsense with Changhua was actually entirely because of Sovereign Chen. Changhua was somewhat noncommittal about this. It seemed like he was being looked down upon. It didn't matter. Let's see who's the real deal then. Therefore, Changhua didn't say anything more. He directly cupped his fists and bowed to Xianyuan Wuhan. Changhua, would Mr. Wuhan please enlighten me?" Chenghua's reaction seemed to be somewhat out of Xianyuan Wuhan's expectations. Therefore, after hearing his declaration of war, a faint smile immediately appeared on Xianyuan Wuhan's face. "Oh. Come then." The battle suddenly started just like that. Chenghua's figure was like a ghost, and he instantly disappeared on the spot. Seeing that, Xianyuan Wuhan's reaction was completely different from the opponents that Changhua had encountered before. He didn't take out his own magic weapon. Instead, he imitated Changhua and went up to meet him with his bare hands. Both of their speeds were extremely fast. As soon as they came into contact, there was a series of bang 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 sounds of fists and feet colliding on the stage. In just a blink of an eye, the two of them had already exchanged a few blows. Although Changhua had already mentally prepared himself to a certain extent before this. But at this moment, only then did he truly understand how terrifying Xianyuan Wuhan was. Even though Xianyuan Wuhan hadn't learned martial arts before, he was actually able to rely on his own rich cultivation and some shallow experience that he had accumulated from watching the battle before the competition to firmly suppress Changhua. Chenghua's movements were very fast, but Xianyuan Wuhan was even faster than him. Chenghua's moves were very ingenious, but Xianyuan Wuhan was able to imitate him in the blink of an eye and return the favor in an instant. This was the true peak of Golden Elixir realm. In terms of cultivation, in terms of experience, in terms of skills, Changhua was still too young. And under the suppression of such absolute strength, he was like an unlucky person who had fallen into a quagmire. The harder he struggled, the faster he sank. When Xianyuan Wuhan gradually adapted to Chenghua's moves and gradually figured out some tricks from them, then, Changhua wouldn't be far from failure. Chapter 518. In the end, the martial arts that Changhua learned was actually just a gold core stage cultivation method. In the future, as Qin Shueqing's cultivation continued to improve, this cultivation method might gradually become stronger and perfect. But before that, if Cheng Hua wanted to completely defeat Xianyuan Wuhan with this imperfect martial arts cultivation method, this was tantamount to a fool's dream. Xianyuan Wuhan was really too strong. The so-called invincible in the same realm was not just a saying. Xianyuan Wuhan did not even use any magic arts, nor did he use any magic treasures. He only needed to copy and learn Cheng Hua's moves through actual combat, and he could quickly master these moves, and then use the same moves to deal with Cheng Hua. The reason was not that Xianyuan Wuhan had a unique skill of giving someone a taste of their own medicine, but because the moves that Cheng Hua used were all on the surface, so Xianyuan Wuhan could quickly learn them for his own use. Immortal techniques were from the inside out, martial arts were from the outside in. The two seemed to be poles apart, but in fact, they were different paths leading to the same goal. It was just like that old saying, the great Tao was like mercury flowing to the ground, and every grain was round. On the stage, Cheng Hua and Xianyuan Wuhan exchanged blows quickly. Below the stage, everyone cheered for Cheng Hua in unison. Since Xianyuan Wuhan was the great demon king in everyone's hearts, then Cheng Hua, who dared to fight with the great demon king, naturally became the hero in everyone's hearts. Although everyone knew that Cheng Hua would definitely fail, as long as he did not fall, the cheers below the stage would not stop for a moment. The two figures were like ghosts as they moved quickly on the stage. In just 10 minutes, the two had already exchanged no less than 200 moves. And as the two fought longer and longer, Cheng Hua also gradually showed signs of defeat. Just like a sports competition, when the skills and experience of the two sides were almost the same, physical strength became the most important deciding factor. Maintaining the protective shield consumed true essence, and every attack also consumed true essence. Cheng Hua was merely in the middle stage of the Gold Core realm. How could he fight with Xianyuan Wuhan, who was in the peak stage of the Gold Core realm for a long time? At that moment, any onlooker with a little bit of knowledge could see that Cheng Hua's defeat was inevitable. This child, he's already been forced to this point, but he's still not willing to show his true abilities. Yuan Liang, do you think he really only knows these moves, or does he have other plans in mind? The patriarch and the 8 elders were still watching the battle from the sky. After hearing the patriarch's question, Genrio fell silent. He did not respond. That was because he knew, regarding Cheng Hua's current performance, the patriarch was indeed somewhat disappointed. To be honest, if Cheng Hua wasn't a sovereign disciple, he wouldn't even have the qualifications to exchange blows with Xianyuan Wuhan. No matter how the outside world slandered and insulted Xianyuan Wuhan, in the patriarch's eyes, Xianyuan Wuhan would always be the person who had the most hope of breaking through to become a heavenly venerable after him. Outsiders didn't know the trick and only thought that Xianyuan Wuhan's potential had been squeezed dry. In reality, it was Xianyuan Wuhan himself who was unwilling to break through to become a Yuanying. In order to be able to repeatedly enter the great illusionary land, Xianyuan Wuhan had suppressed himself for 200 years. Even the patriarch couldn't help but be amazed by such boldness. There aren't that many geniuses in the world to begin with, and all those who have appeared out of nowhere are those who have accumulated in the past. Compared to Xianyuan Wuhan, Cheng Hua instantly became ordinary. As expected. After another 100 to 200 moves, Cheng Hua accidentally revealed an extremely small flaw because of his lack of strength. Xianyuan Wuhan keenly found this flaw, so he grabbed the opportunity and directly hit Cheng Hua's chest with a crushing punch. Bam! Accompanied by a muffled sound, a strong gust of wind blew on the stage. Cheng Hua's body was like a sandbag, and he was directly sent flying 20 meters away by Xianyuan Wuhan's attack. After Xianyuan Wuhan punched again, he didn't continue to attack. Instead, he suddenly stopped and silently waited for Cheng Hua to stand up from the ground again. Unlike the people below the stage who were sighing and lamenting, Cheng Hua appeared very relaxed. After Cheng Hua stood up from the ground, he politely cupped his fists and bowed to Xianyuan Wuhan. Then, he said calmly, "Sir, you're very capable. I admit defeat. Although this punch didn't cause any substantial damage to Cheng Hua, he still admitted defeat very straightforwardly. After all, Xianyuan Wuhan didn't use any Dharma treasures or spells. He could actually easily defeat Cheng Hua with just a half-baked martial arts move that he learned on the spot. Even if he continued to fight, wouldn't he be humiliating himself? Anyway, Cheng Hua wasn't interested in the great illusionary land. Since he lost, then he would just admit defeat straightforwardly. Perhaps because he was used to being trampled by Qin Shueqing, Cheng Hua didn't care about winning or losing at all. After admitting defeat, he turned around and prepared to leave. However, just as Cheng Hua admitted defeat and left, Xianyuan Wuhan's voice suddenly sounded behind him. I heard that Mr. Chen once fought against the 4 immortals of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven by himself, so I originally thought that this master of the heavenly pivot must have some great ability to maneuver unhindered and invincible. Who would have thought that after seeing him today, I would know that the rumors were also untrue. At this point, Xianyuan Wuhan suddenly couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. Supreme Being? That's all. Xianyuan Wuhan's voice was very soft, but his tone was full of mockery. It was obvious that he was implying something with these words. So, Cheng Hua immediately stopped in his tracks. He slowly turned around, and the expression on his face finally became serious. I know, you said this just to provoke me to fight you with all my strength. But I still want to remind you, you can scold me, but you shouldn't have brought Mr. Chen into this. As he spoke, Cheng Hua stretched out his right hand. Then, without any movement from Cheng Hua, a long sword with a cold blue light appeared in his hand out of thin air. Come on. Don't you all want to know what I learned from Mr. Chen? Then I'll show you today, what exactly did I learn. He didn't know when it started, but the figure who smiled all day to make his daughter happy had become an absolutely inviolable existence in Cheng Hua's mind. Xianyuan Wuhan could say that he wasn't good at learning, but he definitely couldn't say that Mr. Chen's reputation was undeserved. Including Genryo, the Patriarch, the 8 Elders, and Xianyuan Wuhan, who was in front of him at this moment, almost everyone was eager to know what peerless cultivation method Cheng Hua had learned from Chen Shi. Was the cultivation method used by a supreme being really that important? Thinking of this, Cheng Hua couldn't help but lower his head slightly to look at the long sword in his hand. In a trance, he saw the scene of Chen Shi holding the little fellow and standing in the courtyard with a smile on his face. Yes, Cheng Hua was very lucky. Others would lose their lives in vain if they went to the Tianshu ruins. Not only was he fine when he went to the Tianshu ruins, but he was also lucky enough to live with Supreme Chen for a period of time. But who would have thought that, during this period of time, what really benefited Cheng Hua was Mr. Chen's way of dealing with people. Chen Shi indeed didn't accept Cheng Hua as his disciple, and he had never even planned to do so. But in Cheng Hua's heart, Chen Shi was still half his master. It was just that he didn't dare to say it out loud. So, Xianyuan Wuhan could scold him, but he couldn't scold Mr. Chen. Chapter 519. With the idea of clearing Mr. Chen's name, Cheng Hua brazenly drew his sword. The 3-foot-long sword in his hand drew a semicircle in the air, and the tip of the sword pointed directly in Xianyuan Wuhan's direction. The distance between the two of them was about 20 meters. The moment Cheng Hua pointed his long sword at Xianyuan Wuhan sensed a strong murderous aura surging toward him. But what made Xianyuan Wuhan slightly surprised was, although Cheng Hua's murderous aura was strong, the long sword in his hand did not show any signs of vital essence fluctuation. It was just like a lifeless wooden stick. Xianyuan Wuhan looked at Cheng Hua with slight confusion. But then, he could not help but show a trace of seriousness on his face. No, something's wrong. Cheng Hua's murderous aura was so strong, but there was no sign of vital essence fluctuation around him. Under such circumstances, unless Cheng Hua was deliberately mystifying, this sword was definitely extraordinary. So, Xianyuan Wuhan immediately mobilized his vital essence and surrounded himself in it. At the same time, Cheng Hua had also finished accumulating power and raised his hand to wave the long sword in his hand. "Mr. Wuhan, please enlighten me." Cheng Hua roared fiercely, and the long sword in his hand suddenly bloomed with a dazzling light. Before the sword was drawn, the sword chi became one, hidden but not released. The sword momentum was released. In an instant, like a long river hanging upside down, it soared into the sky and into the clouds. Wherever the sword light went, it could be said that heaven and earth lost their color, and the sun and moon turned away in shame. The ultimate sword was only for a moment of youth. This? Just as Cheng Hua waved this sword, the family head, who had been watching the battle in the air, suddenly changed his expression. This sword, why was it so similar to the rumors? As one of the three major families in Ningzhou, the Xianyuan family was naturally very concerned about the Tuoba family's change. There were rumors that the reason why Tuoba Yi was seriously injured and had to escape to death was because he was hit by Mr. Chen's sword. One had to know that Tuoba Yi was an Empyrean-level existence. But he couldn't even take one hit from Mr. Chen, such a strange situation. Just thinking about it made one's hair stand on end. After all, the outside world didn't know what exactly happened at that time, so it was inevitable that everyone would speculate too much about this incident. As the person involved in the incident, Tuoba Yi had been recuperating in seclusion. As for Daoist Master Void Pierce Stage, due to his identity, it was impossible for him to personally appear and refute the rumors. This also caused the rumors to become more and more outrageous. Many people were even guessing whether Chen Shi had already touched the threshold of the semi-sage realm. Otherwise, how could he explain his magnificent feat of fighting against 4 opponents in the Jade Pure Cave Heaven? Since Mr. Chen was so powerful, as his direct disciple, Cheng Hua should have learned something, right? The Patriarch had high hopes for Cheng Hua, so he sent Xianyuan Wuhan to test Cheng Hua. The result was just as the Patriarch had hoped. Cheng Hua was successfully enraged by Xianyuan Wuhan. Thus, he no longer held back, and his first move was a killing move. It was like pressing the shutter of a camera. As a strong light flashed, time suddenly stopped. Everyone felt their minds go blank. By the time they came back to their senses, Xianyuan Wuhan's tall and sturdy body that couldn't be considered to have landed directly flew backwards. Accompanied by a strong gust of wind, Xianyuan Wuhan fell heavily to the ground. Puff! There were no obvious wounds on Xianyuan Wuhan's body, but the violent impact still caused him some internal injuries, so he couldn't help but cough up a mouthful of blood. Cheng Hua won. Looking at Xianyuan Wuhan, who fell heavily to the ground, everyone suddenly felt like they were dreaming. Are you satisfied now? This is a sword move that Mr. Chen taught me. However, Cheng Hua's aptitude is too low, and he can't master the trick, so he can only barely make a pose. In fact, that sword move just now had exhausted all of Cheng Hua's vital essence, but in order to protect Mr. Chen's supreme reputation, Cheng Hua could only hold on to his last breath and pretended to be calm as he declared this victory declaration. After saying that, Cheng Hua turned around and left very confidently. Looking at his back as he left, a thoughtful expression suddenly appeared on Xianyuan Wuhan's face. From the moment Cheng Hua waved the long sword in his hand, winning or losing this competition was no longer important. He not only proved himself, but also indirectly defended Mr. Chen's reputation. This sword move was indeed very powerful. But with the cultivation of the Patriarch and the 8 elders, how could they not see that Cheng Hua was already an arrow at the end of its flight at that time? Although Xianyuan Wuhan suffered internal injuries, he still had the ability to get up and fight again. Therefore, if they continued to fight, Cheng Hua might not even be able to take one move from Xianyuan Wuhan. However, this was only an internal competition within the family after all. Since Cheng Hua waved this sword move, then no matter what the result was, the Patriarch would definitely guarantee that he would be in the top 3. In fact, when Cheng Hua showed that sword move, even the Patriarch, who was watching the battle, could not help but be a little tempted. If he were to use such a miraculous sword technique, what kind of power would it display? Thinking of this, the patriarch could not help but want Cheng Hua to hand over the sword technique. However, due to Mr. Chen's illustrious reputation, he could only suppress this greed in his heart and ask Cheng Hua indirectly. However, Cheng Hua was not stupid. No matter how the patriarch probed, his response was always only one word, which was, Sword 1. It was neither the one sword concealing emptiness nor the great Qian Yuan. It was a set of sword techniques that Chen Shi created himself after hundreds of years of deliberation and deduction in the dark space after breaking through to the insightful emptiness realm. Because this set of sword techniques had been created not long ago and still needed to be perfected, Chen Shi passed the first move to Cheng Hua and Yi Ji, only hoping to find more loopholes from them. Their cultivation was not high, so it was easier to see the problem when they used it. There were always risks in doing experiments, right? They were lucky that there were no problems. Therefore, when Chen Shi passed on Sword 1 to them, he did not forget to repeatedly emphasize the risks involved. But the two of them were good. Not only were they not worried about whether they would be possessed by the devil, but they were diligently practicing every day, wishing that they could grasp this move in one go. In Chen Shi's eyes, the two of them were experimental white mice. But in the eyes of others, the appearance of Sword 1 confirmed their identity as the supreme martial artist's disciples. Therefore, it had to be said that this was really a beautiful misunderstanding. Throughout Chen Shi's life, the cultivation techniques he learned were all the top cultivation techniques in the world. First, there was the 49 styles of heaven evolution, then there was the Xian Tian evil emperor's saber and sword dual arts, and then there were the various treasured scriptures of the divine sect. As long as Chen Shi could think of a cultivation technique, it was basically included in it. Could it be that Chen Shi had nothing to do, so he wanted to create a set of cultivation techniques to play with? Of course, things were not that simple. Chen Shi seemed to be creating his own cultivation technique, but in fact, he was refining what he had learned in his life. Just like the sentence he taught Cheng Hua, the most suitable for oneself was the best. Whether it was magic treasures or cultivation techniques, in fact, it was the same principle. At the insightful emptiness realm, the experience of predecessors could only be used as a reference. In the future, Chen Shi still needed to walk down the road by himself. Rough iron ore could no longer meet the needs of the insightful emptiness realm, so Chen Shi needed to smelt these iron ore until it was refined into steel, then he could continue to use it. Chen Shi personally leaned toward sword techniques. Thus, he used the Moonlight Sword technique and Dark Valley Sword technique as the foundation to create a new cultivation technique that belonged to him. His pair of eagle-like eyes were even more unbridled as they scanned the surroundings. With his current nervous appearance, those who didn't know better would probably think that he was transporting banknotes, by daddy, by mommy. Unlike Chen Shi's vigilance, the little fellow behaved as usual, as if yesterday's love letter incident did not put too much of a psychological burden on her. Therefore, after she smiled and waved goodbye to her parents, she ran into the school gate like a wisp of smoke. As the class monitor, she naturally had to set an example. Therefore, she had to be the first to sit in the classroom before her classmates arrived. Nian had already woken up early enough, but there were still many children in the class who woke up earlier than her. It was not that these children were more diligent than her, but because most of these children lived far away, coupled with the fact that the morning rush hour in Shangjing was too congested, their parents had no choice but to send their children to school early every day and then rush to work. Living in Shangjing was really not easy. How could a rich second generation like Nian understand the hardships? As usual, when Nian arrived at the classroom, there were already a lot of people sitting sparsely in the classroom. Some children gathered together and chatted about games, while others chased and played at the back of the classroom. Not sure who shouted, "Class monitor is here," but a few mischievous children stopped what they were doing and returned to their seats. Looking at this situation, Nian Nian, the class monitor, was almost synonymous with the teacher. Nian Nian was very satisfied with the self-awareness of her classmates, so she went back to her seat. Because of yesterday's love letter incident, she did not immediately take out her textbook after putting down her bag. Instead, she bent down and looked at her drawer. Sure enough, there was another thing that did not belong to her. It was a piece of chocolate. Because Cheng Hua and Yi Ji loved to eat chocolate, Nian Nian also ate a lot with them, so she could be considered as knowledgeable. This type of chocolate was very common in the supermarket, called Ferrero. Usually, there were 3 in a box, and a box cost 9 yuan. For adults, 9 yuan was naturally nothing, not to mention that there was only one here, and it did not even have a complete packaging. But for elementary school students who did not have much pocket money, Ferrero's status was far above spicy sticks and potato chips. After all, he only bought one for 3 yuan. You could only eat 1 bite each. From this, it could be seen that this anonymous confessor's feelings for Nian Nian could be considered true love. The moment Nian Nian saw the chocolate, she could not help but hesitate for a moment, then she took it out of the drawer. Regardless of who gave her this piece of chocolate, she would never eat it. Because, whether it was Chen Shi or Aunt Zhang, both of them had taught her not to eat things given by others. Therefore, Nian Nian did not even bat an eyelid. She took the chocolate, turned around, and walked directly to the trash can at the back of the classroom. Children who were arranged to sit next to the trash can by the teacher were usually the most mischievous children in the class. Therefore, when this child saw Nian Nian throw the chocolate into the trash can, his eyes immediately lit up. "This is chocolate. Class monitor, you don't want it? Then I'll take it." This kid was very mischievous. He had already noticed that Nian Nian was holding Ferrero's chocolate. The trash can had to be cleaned every afternoon, so the moment this golden chocolate fell into the trash can, this kid very quickly picked it up. "It's delicious." This child's name was Li Sanduo. His name was given casually, and so was his personality. He did not mind that the chocolate was picked up from the trash can at all. He tore open the packaging and ate it happily. Nian Nian saw that he had picked up the chocolate and was about to return to her seat. At this moment, Li Sanduo suddenly called out to her. "Class monitor. If there's more good food in the future, don't throw it away, give it to me, I'll help you eat, okay?" For the next week, Nian Nian would come to class every morning and find a piece of Ferrero chocolate in her drawer. Actually, she could have asked Big Cat to use its sense of smell to find this guy who had been secretly giving her gifts. However, considering that she didn't want to have any interaction with this person, Nian Nian pretended that nothing had happened. After receiving the chocolate every day, she would give it to Li Sanduo as soon as possible. 3 yuan worth of Ferrero chocolate. She gave it to him for a week. This was King true love. Under the nourishment of these love chocolates, Li Sanduo's complexion seemed to be a lot rosier than before. Even his thin and small figure showed signs of breaking out of the soil and growing at this moment. Li Sanduo was very grateful for Nian Nian's generosity. Therefore, he now looked forward to tomorrow every day, hoping that he could eat such delicious chocolate tomorrow morning. But unfortunately, Li Sanduo's yearning for a happy life didn't last long before it completely came to an end. Early in the morning, after Nian Nian came to class, she habitually looked down at her drawer as usual. Because she didn't see any chocolate, she couldn't help but be stunned. It couldn't be helped, who asked her to develop a habit? Although she was a little surprised, Nian Nian didn't take it to heart. It was better if no one disturbed her. Anyway, she would never fall in love with anyone early. Absolutely impossible. Without the chocolate, Nian naturally didn't need to deal with these things. Therefore, she subconsciously looked back, wanting to tell Li Sanduo that she didn't receive any chocolate today, so that Li Sanduo wouldn't have to wait there helplessly. However, after Nian turned back, she suddenly realized. Li Sanduo was like a frosted eggplant today, hugging his head and curling up in his seat. Looking from afar, he gave off a delicate and pitiful feeling. According to Li Sanduo's casual personality, even if he was scolded by the teacher, the expression on his face wouldn't change at all. Why did he seem like a different person today? Nian felt that it was a little strange. Out of concern for her classmate, after she put away her bag, she went straight to Li Sanduo's side. Li Sanduo, what's wrong with you? Hearing this, Li Sanduo buried his head on the table and didn't move at all. Nian couldn't help but worry, so she reached out and gently pushed him twice. Are you sick? Do you want me to help you apply for leave? Under Nian's constant questioning, Li Sanduo finally sat up from the table. However, he didn't immediately raise his head. Instead, it was as if someone had discovered a shameful secret. He impatiently waved his hand and said, I'm fine, don't bother me. What's wrong with you? Nian felt that his reaction was very strange, so she couldn't help but bend down so that her eyes were level with Li Sanduo's head. Then, she saw the expression on his face. Li Sanduo seemed to be crying. Nian's eyesight was very good, so she immediately saw something strange on Li Sanduo's face. Li Sanduo's right cheek was a little red, and she could faintly see that it was a slap mark, plus the tear stains at the corner of his eyes. Looking at this situation, it seemed like he was bullied. This was bad. The little guy exploded on the spot. You're crying? Who bullied you? Tell me. I'll tell the teacher. Not to mention that she was now the class monitor. Even if she didn't have any position, Nian would never allow bullying in her class. Because her father once said, we must firmly say no to bullying in school. Seeing that Li Sanduo was like a coward who only knew how to lie on the table and cry, Nian was suddenly a little angry. Thus, she grabbed Li Sanduo's arm, pulled him up from his seat, and shouted angrily, Li Sanduo. Stand up. Tell me, who bullied you? I'll help you. No wonder she couldn't find the culprit. No matter how hard she tried, they committed the crime in the morning. Then I have to wake up earlier tomorrow. Daddy, remember to call me. I want to protect Li Sanduo. I can't let him be bullied by others. Seeing the little girl's indignant look, Chen Shi couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. To Chen Shi, the importance of this matter might not be as important as the supermarket discount. But to the little girl, this was an important matter that was enough to establish her values. Thus, not only did Chen Shi not interfere, but he also followed the little girl's request and waited until dawn the next day to pull her out of bed. Wake up, my little hero. There are still people waiting for you to save them. The little girl was still a little dazed at first. After hearing Chen Shi's words, she immediately turned over and jumped out of bed as if she had been injected with chicken blood. Daddy, let's go. How could the great Supreme Chen's daughter be the kind of person with bad values? Born between heaven and earth, she naturally had to be a chivalrous person and uphold justice. After the child who was beaten felt the pain, he immediately let out a blood-curdling scream. Then, as if he had gone crazy, he turned around and rushed towards Li Sanduo. Then, he violently pressed Li Sanduo against the wall and started beating him up with all his might. After all, Nian was a girl, so when facing her, these children might not be able to do it. But if they wanted to hit Li Sanduo, these children would be more ruthless than the other. So, they immediately turned their muzzles and rushed towards Li Sanduo. Seeing this, Li Sanduo changed his usual cowardly image. Not only did he withstand the punches and kicks of everyone, but he also fought back with all his might. A huge battle suddenly broke out just like that. After hearing the sounds of fighting in the corridor, the children who were originally sitting in the classroom rushed out one after another. "There's a fight! There's a fight! Look, there's a fight over there! Go and tell the teacher." "Let me see." They could not bring their phones on duty, so one of them raised his wrist and looked at it, then replied, "Ah, it's already 4:30 in the blink of an eye, 4:30? The Forbidden City is about to close." Just as the two of them were busy lamenting the passing of time, an extremely sharp whistle suddenly sounded not far away. Whoosh! Those who did not know would think that it was the red armband at the traffic light intersection directing traffic, but after the two of them heard it, they immediately jumped out of the car as if they had received some kind of order. "Quick! Set up the cordon." The whistle was the secret signal for this operation. Since the whistle sounded, it meant that the troublemakers had shown up. Just as expected. Just as the police were busy setting up the cordon and sealing off the square, the martial artists on the 3 buses also rushed out of the cars. When was the Forbidden City the most crowded? It was when it opened in the morning and when it closed in the afternoon. Therefore, after the whistle sounded, all the Wu Lian action personnel went against the flow of people and swarmed toward Tiananmen. At the same time, a tour group of about 30 to 40 people walked out of the entrance of the scenic area under the guidance of the tour guide. "It's them, take them down." While the operation team and intelligence group repeatedly confirmed the target's information, the elderly tour group slowly walked out of the passage under the guidance of the tour guide and came directly under the president's statue. Soon after, a shocking scene occurred. After these old men walked out of the city gate tower's passageway, they neatly lined up in a 6x6 square formation as if they had rehearsed it beforehand. Then, they all sat cross-legged on the ground. From the beginning to the end, these elderly people did not make a single sound. Wait, something happened. They're staging a sit-in. Unlike ordinary protesters, this Superpunxi group was small in number and their behavior was very strange. The tour guide was the only middle-aged man. After seeing his tour group doing such a shocking thing, he did not stand up to stop them. Instead, he directly walked past the crowd and stood in the first row of the group. The tour guide stood while the elderly people sat. When the passing tourists saw this scene, they could not help but stop and stand nearby and whisper to each other. "What's going on? What's going on? Is something big going to happen? Where's the phone? Take a picture." As more and more people gathered in the square. After taking a deep breath, the tour guide faced the elderly people and slowly sat on the ground. Then, the middle-aged man dressed as a tour guide recited in front of everyone in the room, with a cadence of intonation, "This is the beginning of the end. Xian Cultivator, the ancestor of nature, and the great sect of thousands of people. It's profound, so it's called subtle. It's continuous, so it's called wonderful. It's high, so it covers the 9 heavens, so it's wide, so it covers the 8 corners. It's as bright as the sun and the moon, so fast as lightning. It's as bright as a flash, or drifting like a stream of stars, or rippling like a deep pool, or flying like a cloud. This passage came from a Taoist classic. Naturally, ordinary people would not understand what he was saying. But for the members of the operation group, this passage was no less shocking than a sudden clap of thunder. It was inexplicably shocking. This is a cultivation technique? He's preaching. Quick, stop him. Hearing the manager's angry roar from the headset, the staff suddenly came back to their senses. Then, they no longer cared about shocking the world. In front of all the tourists present, they directly pounced on the elderly tour group fiercely. However, just as one of the operation members was about to get close to the elderly people, an invisible force suddenly sent him flying and he fell heavily on the wall of the tower. Bang! With a muffled sound, the operation member, who was only at the mid-stage of concealing strength, fainted on the spot. Chapter 530. Come here to shock the virtues, spread the teachings under the gate tower. In this day and age, traffic could be converted into cash. As long as there were people watching online, there would naturally be money to be made. Therefore, as soon as this elderly tour group sat down, someone next to them picked up their phone and started filming the entire process. According to the Public Security Administration punishment law, this tour group's behavior had seriously disrupted the order of the square, so the square's security personnel had the right to expel them. The operation personnel wanted to forcibly take this elderly tour group away, but due to the fact that there were too many tourists around, they did not dare to make too much of a commotion. Since they could not force their way in, they could only set up a cordon and wait for backup. While the operation personnel were anxious, the middle-aged man dressed as a tour guide sat on the ground, turning a blind eye to everything that was happening around him. Even though Wu Lian's operation personnel had already stood in front of him and tried to dissuade him, he still ignored them. Instead, he continued to chant some kind of unknown scripture. The middle-aged man's voice was not loud, but everyone present could clearly hear the scripture he was chanting. This kind of behavior was a little strange no matter how one looked at it. It would definitely go viral on the internet. Therefore, many tourists directly picked up their phones and started filming the entire process, so this scene instantly spread all over the internet. Don't film. If you film again, I'll confiscate all their phones. Seeing that the situation was gradually getting out of control, the director in charge of this operation made a prompt decision and directly ordered the confiscation of everyone's phones. Some of the tourists were frightened and ran away on the spot. However, some tourists were very hot-tempered. Seeing that the operation personnel were about to confiscate their phones, not only did they not dodge, but they also pointed their cameras at the operation personnel and kept shouting, "Come, everyone, come and see, the security guards of Tiananmen Square are violently enforcing the law." For a moment, the situation was a little out of control. Just as Wu Lian was busy driving away the onlookers, the 4 celestial beings who had heard the news also arrived at the scene and directly launched a strong attack on the array formed by the elderly people. These elderly people seemed to have cultivation, but they had not been cultivating for long. Among them, the most powerful one had probably just touched the threshold of the Qi refinement stage. Therefore, as soon as the 4 celestial beings launched an attack, the entire array suddenly shook. But at this moment, the tour guide suddenly stopped chanting. Then, he slowly stood up from the ground and said to the people around him, "Everyone, stop. I've done what I have to do. I'll go with you now." As soon as the middle-aged man finished speaking, the elders behind him all stood up from the ground and quickly walked to his side. From the looks of it, these old people in their 70s and 80s seem to be following the lead of this middle-aged man. Seeing this, the operation personnel could not help but look at each other, as if they could not understand the actions of the person in front of them. There are too many people here. Hurry up and take them away. After the middle-aged man surrendered, the supervisor quickly rushed down from the tower. For the sake of safety, the supervisor signaled for the operation personnel to handcuff all the old people in front of him. Regarding this, the middle-aged man in the lead seemed to be quite dissatisfied. Thus, he went directly to the supervisor and pleaded for these old people. These old people have only been cultivating with me for a short period of time. Today, they are only here to cheer for me. May I ask what crime they have committed? If you insist on denouncing them, then go ahead and take me back. This has nothing to do with them. Don't worry, if I really want to cause trouble, today, I won't preach here, and I won't surrender without a fight. Hearing this, the supervisor had no choice but to take a serious look at the person in front of him. To be honest, if he really had to forcibly take these old people away in front of all the tourists present, there might be some bizarre negative news on the internet tomorrow. And according to the information that Wu Lian had received before, the instigator of everything today seemed to be this middle-aged man in front of him. Therefore, after hearing the middle-aged man's words, the supervisor immediately walked to the side. After a short discussion with the higher-ups, the final decision was made. Take this person back. The others go to the side and register in order. If there are no problems, let them go. The middle-aged man seemed to be very satisfied with this arrangement. Thus, he turned around and whispered some instructions to the old people. Then, he took the initiative to follow the supervisor into a bus not far away. Throughout the entire process, the old people present did not say a word. They all seemed to listen to the middle-aged man in front of them. Therefore, after the middle-aged man was taken away by Wu Lian, only a few old people could not suppress the sadness in their hearts and silently shed tears. On the bus. As usual, Wu Lian began to interrogate the middle-aged man. What's your name? Where are you from? Do you know what you've done today? Wu Lian had to treat this celestial being with caution. Therefore, once the man got on the bus, the operation personnel handcuffed him with special stainless steel handcuffs. My Daoist name is Yujing. Since I was born in Wuxia, then I'm from Wuxia. Is that how you answer? Speak human language.